radio station.
Gleeman and the Geek. Gleeman and the Geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause the Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek on KFAN. This is the Big Rain Check edition. I'm John Bonus of TwinLaily.com. With me, Aaron Gleeman of TheAthletic.com.
I'm afraid to ask what that means.
Well, usually Dan Barrera is the big ticket.
Oh.
He is out.
Yeah.
They've got the baseball guys filling in. We are the Big Rain Check.
Yeah, we'll see if Chad Abbott comes running down the hallway, realizing the mistake he's made of putting us on the air. Like he said, he's John Bonus, a.k.a. the Twins Geek, who is the man behind Twins Daily, as well as TikToks that have been viewed hundreds of times by people who
Dozens of times.
accidentally stumbled across them and think, what is this old guy on TikTok for? I am Aaron Gleeman, a Twins beat writer for The Athletic. We co-host now for, over 10 years, the very creatively titled Gleeman and the Geek podcast.
Correct.
Which hopefully a lot of you have listened to before. But if not, if you don't hate the next 3 hours that you're going to listen to as we fill the very big shoes of the big ticket Dan Barrero, check out the Gleeman and the Geek podcast. We're going to talk a lot of Twins today. They are 3-0 as we speak, although their fourth game is tonight.
Right.
And they're in Miami to face Luis Arraez and the Miami Marlins. We're going to talk what we saw from them in Kansas City opening weekend. We're going to look ahead to this Miami series. And then Thursday is Houston coming to town for the home opener.
Right.
We're also going.
We'll see if it's Thursday.
Yeah, I was. Well, did you see the St. Paul Saints AAA?
I know.
Have postponed, although they were supposed to open yesterday at CHS Field. They've pushed that back because it's going to be not
tomorrow.
Great.
Hoping tomorrow.
Yeah, yesterday. Well, hi, Abbott. Do you see the mistake you've made? I'm now inventing time travel for the St. Paul Saints. But I also just wanted to say before we get going, because we're going to talk a lot of Twins. We might even open up. I don't know if we're going to do phone lines. Maybe we'll take some mailbag via, booth at KFAN.
Yeah, but what's that thing that the
talkback or
the
whatever.
Talkback.
I'm afraid of that.
Oh no, that's
maybe
the best.
Or people can just tweet me at Aaron Gleeman Twins questions. We're going to do a couple mailbag segments because that's a staple of our podcast over the years that we've done. I also I'm a kid from St. Paul. I grew up in Highland Park, and I'm 40 years old. And so the Chad and Barrero days were right in my wheelhouse growing up, listening to that constantly. And in the years since then, Barrero show. And like in the last year or so, I've started to be a semi-regular guest during baseball season talking to Barrero. And that to me was so incredibly exciting to be able to come in and talk to someone that I grew up listening to for, hundreds and hundreds of hours of radio. Right. To fill in for him.
Right.
Is kind of incredible to me. Like if you'd have told me when I was, 14, living on Howell off Montreal Avenue in Highland Park, someday Barrero's going to take a little vacation and you and some weird old guy who you talk to about the Twins 3 times a week are going to sub for him. I'd have a lot of questions, like who's this weird old guy? John, his name's John. Okay, well, whatever. But yeah, so we're very excited to be here. I'm glad the Twins started 3-0 and not 0-3 because the tone of this show and the potential calls would be a lot different.
I'll be honest with you, I would be happy either way for this show.
Yeah, what we didn't want was 1-2, 2-1.
Yeah, exactly right. I don't want a lot of we're swimming in the middle here. I want to be really high or really low on this team. And I mean, right now you can't help but be really high, although. As will be pointed out, I think, several times over and over, it was versus the Kids.
Yes. Now, it was on the road.
Yes.
So that is always a
something
slightly higher degree of difficulty. And, I mean, to be honest, the Marlins, who they're now playing starting tonight, are not a great team, but that's also on the road. And the Marlins do have some very good pitching that they're going to see. They have the reigning Cy Young winner that they're going to face on Tuesday. But the Royals are not, I was going to say not a great team. They're not even probably a good team. No. I do think they have some pretty good young hitters that were largely shut down by the Twins. But yeah, to go 3-0 against them is,
Lyles is starting game 2.
Right. Yeah, they have one very good pitcher, Brady Singer, but they pushed him back to the second series because he didn't pitch during he was on Team USA for the WBC and didn't pitch So they felt like he wasn't fully stretched out. So that he's their one sort of star caliber arm that the Twins got to not see.
Zach Greinke was star caliber. He's not now, but
so was I.
Still fun to watch.
I had a lot of upside once upon a time.
I don't remember that.
How dare you, John? You've only known me since I was 19, John.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? When I say I've been partnered with this creepy old guy, I was 19 when I first got partnered with him. But here's what I'll say about that. Like, first of all, they can only play who the schedule says. And by the way, they have 10 more games against Kansas City. So the idea that, beating up on Kansas City isn't telling.
And you can't do a lot better than 3-0.
Right. That's the other thing. They beat them all three. Like, okay, if they'd have gone 2-1 and we'd be saying, oh, they didn't look that great. But I also think the most impressive part of it, now in game 3, the bats kind of broke out a little bit, including obviously Joey Gallo had a couple of homers, almost had a 3-homer game.
The bat broke out more so than the bats.
But overall for the series, it was the Twins pitching, and specifically the starting pitching. The bullpen was really good in the first 2 games too. That really stood out. And yes, the Royals are unlikely to have, a top 5 lineup in the American League. I do think they have some pretty good young hitters, but here's what I'll say about evaluating the pitching. There are kind of 2 ways you can look at pitching performances. You can look at the fact that the starting pitchers, which was Pablo Lopez, Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, in that order for the 3 games, gave up 1 run in 16 1/3 innings.
That's right.
And you can say, well, okay, but they were facing, a glorified AAA lineup or whatever. Yeah, that's fine. So maybe they would have given up 3 runs instead of 1, either way. But the way I think you can also look at it is you can set aside the results and look at their raw stuff that we saw, not only from those 3 starting pitchers, but from the bullpen. And you look at Lopez, and he's a guy who threw 93, 94 for the Marlins last year. The Twins got him for Luis Rise in that trade. So he's going to be facing his old team in game 3 of this Marlins series.
That's right, yeah.
On Wednesday. But he was throwing 95, 96.
And pitching to the guy that we traded for.
That's true, yeah. We'll see. If a Rise hits a homer off him leading off the game, Twins Twitter might explode. But that'll be okay. That'll be fun, too. But you can look at Lopez and say he threw 5 1/3 shutout innings, went like 85 pitches, didn't have great fastball command, but he was 95, 96 consistently with the fastball, which is a mile or 2 faster than he was last year. His changeup has always been a great pitch, and it was very effective against the Royals.
His changeup has always been his best pitch.
Yes, I mean, it's one of the best changeups in all baseball, and against lefties and righties alike. But what he really showed was a new pitch that he had been kind of tweaking with the help of the Twins coaching staff, which they're calling a sweeper, which is, you can call it a slider, a curveball, whatever. It's a breaking ball that moves more
down and away from right-handed batters.
Yes, as opposed to kind of a 12-6 curveball, the big Burt Blyleven, big breaking curveball. This is more of a kind of slider curveball hybrid that is going to go east-west a little bit more. And you've seen, it's really the last year or so has kind of taken hold as a lot of analytically oriented coaching staffs and look at the data, and they realize if we can kind of invent this pitch, we can kind of know what the characteristics are, the movement data, where you throw it, how you throw it, and we can almost extrapolate behind the scenes how it will fare against hitters. And then, you put it to the test against hitters, and he threw it like 20 times, and it got, I think, 8 swings and misses, no real damage done against it. And so
part of that can just be nobody else has really seen it before.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, not that the Royals are real familiar with Pablo Lopez to begin with.
True.
Right. But it's interesting to me because it's a weapon against same-sided hitters. Now, usually that is not something that pitchers necessarily need, right? Because you're usually better against same-sided hitters.
Most pitchers have a really good slider that they use righty on righty or lefty on lefty.
That's right. Lopez's best pitch is a changeup. That is usually something that you use against the opposite-handed hitters.
You may have, if Twins fans saw Frank Viola, Brad Radke, Johan Santana, great changeups. Those were actually more effective against opposite-sided hitters than their own side.
Exactly. Yeah. So what's really encouraging about seeing Pablo Lopez develop this pitch is that, of the things that he doesn't do well, he does most things pretty well. The changeup that he has is good enough that it plays versus right-handed and left-handers. But, it's almost always going to play better versus left-handers. And now he has developed this pitch that runs away, literally flees right-handed hitters. And that provides him, what weakness he might have shown in the past. Now he's got a new weapon in that in that arsenal.
So I was in Fort Myers for like 3 weeks in the middle of spring training, and after his first start for the Twins, or in a Twins uniform, because he left for the WBC shortly after that to pitch for Venezuela. But I said to him, were you throwing two different types of curveballs in this start? Because I was looking at, there's a site called Baseball Savant, which will show you the break and the spin rate and all that. And it was clear to me that
in real time.
Yes, as it happens.
As the game is happening.
And it was clear to me that it wasn't his normal pitch because all the data was much different than the curveball that he threw at times with the Marlins last year. And he smiled and he said, yes. And he said, what we're trying to do, and it's the sweeper that he now fully unveiled against Kansas City. And he said, what we're trying to do is, I know my changeup is a really good pitch. Everyone knows my changeup is a really good pitch. I throw it like 35, 40% of the time. But what we're trying to do is not go away from the changeup, but kind of protect it as a go-to pitch and make it more difficult to just kind of approach him if you're a hitter. Because there are hitters, and we saw this against Johan Santana. Johan didn't get knocked around much, but when he got knocked around, it was from homers off the changeup. Because some lineups would just say, this guy is too good if we're just going to kind of go along with him. We have to remove the fastball from our
thought
plan
process,
and just focus on the changeup.
We just try to foul off the fastball so we don't strike out.
And we sit on the changeup.
We wait for the
And sometimes he leaves the changeup up,
Right.
and if you're sitting on it, you can hit it very far.
Yeah, because a changeup is just a slower fastball.
Sort of, yeah. And so Lopez's point was, I have to be able to show spin, whether it's a slider, a sweeper, a curveball, whatever you want to call it, especially to right-handed hitters, but to everyone in general, to make it from like a game theory perspective, make them have 3 things they have to track or maybe 4 things they have to track instead of just the A-B of fastball changeup. And I think he's already, we'll see the consistency with which he can throw this newish pitch, command it in the strike zone and all that stuff. But I would say it's so far beyond kind of the entry-level pitch that he's already using it 20 times out of 85 pitches. He's getting swings and misses.
Did he throw it more times than he threw his changeup?
Yes, a couple more than even the changeup. And he threw more changeups than any pitcher in baseball last year. He threw over 1,000 changeups last year. And so whether it's Lopez from a stuff perspective, I thought Joe Ryan threw the second hardest pitch he had ever thrown yesterday, 96 miles an hour. A lot of the relievers we saw, Caleb Feuerbach's pumping 95 consistently now, which the first time around Caleb Feuerbach was throwing about 89.
Right.
Everybody who came out of that bullpen for the most part was 95 plus with the fastball. And so that gets back to my point at the beginning of this, which was you can judge it by results and you can say, well, the degree of difficulty wasn't that great because Kansas City's not that great. And I'm willing to go along with that. That's obviously true.
Right.
But you can also say, well, the fact that he was throwing 96 with his fastball is universal.
Right.
Like the damage done against it might be higher versus the Astros than versus.
And we saw it throughout spring training. It was the talk of spring training.
A storyline, especially for the starters.
The first 2 weeks of spring training, over and over and over again, we were seeing pitchers throwing faster than we had seen them throw before. And to some extent, the question there was, does this mean they're going to be throwing faster in the regular season too, or does that just mean that they've gotten up to speed? Because usually at the beginning of spring training, people's fastballs are down a little bit, and they try to build that up during spring training. Or does it mean that they're just getting there a little faster because they're getting ready for the WBC or what? But what we're seeing is increased velocity and a starting rotation that looks impressive. And when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about last year's Achilles heel, which was the bullpen. Dun, dun, dun. A word from Soda Stick, who we just had at our big event the other day. It's baseball season, so guess what they did, Aaron Gleeman?
If they're smart, which they are, they restocked all their great baseball stuff.
That is correct. Yes.
Here's what I always say about Soda Stick. It's opening day, home opener coming up. Yeah, you can just go buy a Twins shirt like everyone, but you want to be walking around Target Field in a shirt that's creative and sort of a unique design, which is what they specialize in. You want people to go, where'd you get that shirt?
Right,
and
exactly,
almost inevitably, the answer is Soda Stick.
Yeah, that's right.
They have the I Got Blown Out of the Metrodome one. They had last year famously the Tony Oliva hitting school, also the Arise 316. You've seen all their designs.
I wear that Wiener Winter t-shirt way too much.
Yes. The Twins players themselves are constantly wearing Soda Stick shirts in the clubhouse. I can tell you that firsthand.
Yes.
So go to Soda Stick, soda like Minnesota, sodastickco.com, or just Google Soda Stick. Take a look at the website. They have a ton of good baseball stuff. Like you said, it's just been restocked.
Right.
They also have all Minnesota sports, super creative, small batch designs. You'll love it. I always challenge people, go to their website. I will guarantee you find at least one thing that you want. And here's the thing. Use the promo code Gleeman, and you can get 15% off your order right now.
15% off using the promo code Gleeman at sodastick.com.
The KFAN Bradshaw and Bryant text line is live. You can make your voice heard during your favorite KFAN show by texting your message to 64686. That is 64686. Standard text message and data rates apply.
And welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek.
They have all our old music. Can you believe that, Jim?
I know. Yeah, it's been a few years since we've been on KFN. We used to be doing Sunday afternoons post-Twins game. And now we are strictly podcasting / Patreoning.
Yeah.
If you would like to listen to, more beyond these 3.5 hours of Twins talk,
imagine that
you're going to see, you're going to have both today and Wednesday. If you are yet more a glutton for punishment, just Google Gleeman and the Geek. You'll be able to find our podcast or our Patreon.
Yeah.
For a lot more.
So we mentioned this a little bit last segment, but we'll switch now to the bullpen and talk about them a little bit because they also did an exceptional job for most of the Kansas City series. It fell apart a little bit in the third game, but those were also the relievers that they kind of hold back for not key spots. I mean, Giovanni Moran, I think, has a very bright future. Emilio Pagan, I'll let you speak on that. But those guys were the last guys to pitch for a reason, and that was that the Twins were kind of holding them back for spots that weren't high leverage. Cole Sands, the long reliever, was the only one of the 13 pitchers on the roster who's yet to appear. And by the way, the fact that that's kind of the role of a long reliever.
Right. I mean, his role is to come in and help out when you're losing games. Right. And
when it's 10-2, one way or the other. And so that's hard to predict, obviously. But that's one of the reasons why, for instance, Bailey Ober, who is the sixth guy for a 5-man rotation and he's now at AAA St. Paul, even though he spent the last 2 years in the majors pitching pretty damn well. But that's why he was not kept as a long reliever in that Cole Sands role, is because it's very hard to kind of ensure a consistent workload in that role.
Right.
And for a guy like Cole Sands, who I'm not saying Cole Sands doesn't have upside and won't have a solid career, but they don't view Cole Sands as one of their top pitching prospects. He's not sort of a building block type of guy. Whereas someone like Bailey Ober or Louis Varland or Simeon Woods Richardson, some of their better prospects at AAA, could, in theory, fill a long relief role. And that is a common place to put young starting pitchers. I mean, Johan Santana famously did that for a couple years or 3 years, a little too long in my book. But he was a long reliever. You get your feet wet, you show you can handle big league hitters, and then you move into the rotation. But I think the fact that they've tried in the past. I remember they did this with Randy Dobnak a few years ago, where he was the sixth starter for a 5-man rotation. They said, we'll just put him in the bullpen. He'll keep working as a long reliever, and we'll keep him stretched out, and he'll be ready to start when needed. And then 2 weeks passed, and there were no blowouts.
Right.
And it was like, well, we got to just send him to AAA because this isn't doing anyone any good. So that's why someone like Cole Sands has the long relief job over someone like Bailey Ober or Louis Varland. But the rest of the bullpen.
But, I mean, real quick, though, on Sands, the other thing about that, what sort of failed with the Dobnak experiment a couple of years ago is, they sort of designated him in that role as opposed to, I think with Sands, it's more of we've got about 4 or 5 guys that we're going to plug in and out of that role.
Right.
Like I think whether or not Sands makes an appearance, he could be making an appearance as early as today or more likely Tuesday, Tuesday or Thursday when the Astros come to town.
Yeah.
It's got, the games where the Twins are in real danger of losing a game.
I bet he pitches in that Astros series.
Right, that's right.
I mean, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but there's going to be some runs scored in that.
Right, exactly. After that, as soon as he goes 4 innings and gives your bullpen a little bit of a break, he gets sent down, and one of 3 other
it's a revolving door.
Right, Aaron Sanchez or Randy Dobnak or
Brent Hedrick.
Right. Ronnie Enriquez if he was healthy. Like there's a number of guys sitting down at St. Paul that are sort of being, or maybe Jose De Leon. Like there's a bunch of guys who are kind of these guys' role in the majors is probably a 4th or a 5th starter or a long reliever. And we're just going to swap each of them. And I think what you'll see is that guy, somebody like Sands being sent down, whether or not they make an appearance. It's possible that, it's been 6 days and he hasn't been out there yet. We got to get this guy some work. Let's send him down, and then we'll call somebody else. The
problem, they've done that with the last 1 or 2 bullpen spots pretty consistently over the last 3 or 4 years, which is, it's a weird paradox. It's like the better and longer you pitch as the last guy in the bullpen.
Right.
Like if Cole Sands is needed in the 3rd inning, one of these next few games, and he pitches 4 scoreless innings of long relief, and throw 65 pitches,
Right.
his here's your present for that, like here's your reward for that is going to be a trip to St. Paul, because the problem is when you do a good job in long relief or even a mediocre job in long relief, you're going to be unavailable for the next 48, 72 hours. And then they need somebody in that role. They don't want to play with a 12-man staff when they can just send you down. It's not quite fair from a service time standpoint, and it's not a justified reward for a guy pitching well. But we saw this with like guys like Jarrell Cotton last year. He'd pitch a couple innings in relief, he'd get sent to AAA, and they'd have they want a fresh arm in that role. Yeah, that's right. Looking more at the more traditional part of the bullpen, and maybe we'll have to get to this next segment. But what I was impressed by, everyone, you can look at John Duran throwing 102, 103. I mean, we saw it last year. He's just incredible. He slept wrong, they said.
I heard he was available yesterday.
Friday night.
Yeah, right.
And didn't pitch Saturday, so they had Lopez close it out because they said he slept wrong. Which,
I think one of the ways that was interesting about the first three games is how clearly it sort of demonstrated the hierarchy that exists in the bullpen.
The pecking order.
The pecking order was so very clear in that you've got, in the game one, it goes 4-3-2-1, right? From Thielbar to Lopez. Maybe not. Maybe Thielbar is actually sort of a little bit of a wild card. I'd like to talk a little bit more about him. But
Thielbar's one of their best relievers, but he's also shown a real ability to kind of put out fires for other pitchers. So they're more keen on using him with, two guys on base in the middle of an inning.
Or as a weapon, like in that second game, he pitched the eighth inning versus the middle of the lineup because he had a number of lefties coming up, right? And so he can be sort of your eighth inning setup man if you've got a lefty heavy lineup. He can be your fireman in the sixth inning if there's something brewing. He's just a nice left-handed weapon to be able to use when you're facing that side of the plate.
But to your point, what we really saw was, you're going to try to get 5 or 6 innings, occasionally 7 innings from a starter. You're going to turn to someone like Thielbar for that 6th, 7th inning zone. Then you're going to turn to Lopez and or Griffin Jacks for that 7th, 8th inning kind of primary setup man zone to get the ball to Duran in the 9th inning. Now, we then saw that flipped around in the second game where Duran was unavailable, so it's hard to draw huge conclusions for that. But Lopez closed it out. I do think they want a sort of dual closer. We've seen that before when they had Taylor Rogers and Sergio Romo, where now that was a lefty and a righty, so it was a little easier. But they certainly, when they acquired Jorge Lopez from the Orioles last August, he immediately took over the closer role with Duran as sort of a sometimes closer, largely setup man. Now, Lopez pitched himself from the closer role to the mop-up role because he was just walking too many people and he just wasn't very effective. But if he's good, I mean, he was an all-star closer for the Orioles when they acquired him. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see some mixing and matching there. Give guys days off, depending, are you facing the 3-4-5 of a lineup or the 8-9-1 of a lineup? You might go with Lopez for the bottom of the lineup, whereas you might save Duran for the meat of the lineup, wherever that is. But I do think the pecking order in general is going to be Duran is, a cut above everyone. He's going to be their primary closer, but they're also going to use him tie games, the highest leverage spots, regardless of save situations. Lopez and Griffin Jacks, I think, they're the next step. And you may see Lopez get some save opportunities like you did already in game 2. Then you have Caleb Thielbar as a kind of Swiss Army knife type of guy. He can close, he can set up, he's a lefty, but he can also get righties. But then the biggest key to me is someone like Jorge Alcala, who before missing most of last season with an elbow problem, showed the potential to be, 97, 98 mile an hour with the fastball, with a very good slider against righties, has some question marks against lefties, but he showed the potential to be a 7th or 8th inning setup.
And
guy.
I think it's significant that in the second game, when they knew they didn't have Duran and they needed a fourth guy, the first guy beyond those, that core four that they have there that they reached to was Alcala. Now they reached to him early, but they reached to him, in a tricky part of the lineup. One of the things, you're talking about the hierarchy, and I think most people, when they think of a hierarchy in the bullpen, they think of it as, and I got some questions about this, why was Lopez used in the 8th inning when that's a higher leverage situation than the 7th inning, et cetera? I think what we saw in both the first 2 games when they, really had to use the bullpen and figure out how they were going to sort the hierarchy is they're still trusting Lopez with the bottom of the lineup. Yes. And they're trusting others with the top or the middle of the lineup.
And that's
right?
they use Duran a lot in that way. People go, why would Duran pitch the 7th inning after he had long been established as their best reliever last year? Well, because 2-3-4 or 3-4-5 were up. So they're matching, yes, the role matters and the score matters and the inning matters, but you want to match guys up, not just lefty-righty, but you want Duran facing the best, most dangerous part of the opposing team's lineup. Sometimes that's the 7th inning, sometimes that's the 8th, sometimes that's the 9th.
So when people were asking, why is Lopez getting the save in game 2? Well, did you see who was batting in the 9th inning?
I would
game
definitely,
2?
as you
it
watch.
was 6, 7, 8. It wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
As you watch the bullpen kind of play itself out, pay attention to the score, obviously, pay attention to the inning, obviously, but also take a look not just at who's coming up in terms of their handedness. If there's a couple lefties coming up, you might see Caleb Thielbar. If it's all righties come up, you might be more likely to see Alcala. But also pay attention to where they are in the lineup and how difficult the matchups are from a just quality of hitter standpoint. And I think that actually will answer a lot of questions that people have on kind of a nightly basis of, why is this guy pitching the 6th when he normally pitches the 8th? Well, it's because the big bats were up in the 6th.
Yeah, exactly. When we get back, what do we want to talk about next, Mr. Gleeman?
I mean, should we talk a little bit about the hitting at some point?
Let's talk lineup when we get back. Buxton's off to a start, and boy, was it nice to see Joey Gallo hit.
Forgotten Star Brewing was just the host of our opening day party, our opening day watch party last Thursday. 324 people showed up.
I was going to say,
absolutely filled it up.
Are they out of beer from that? Or they have more for people?
I did my share.
Yeah,
I'm telling you,
I heard some reports about that. Forgotten Star, it's they've been a relatively long time sponsor. John it's like his home away from home at this point. John loves the building, the vibe, the beer itself.
Right.
The people who run it are great.
Right.
Like you said, you just did a 300-person event there, and they handled it. It's a great spot.
My daughter looked at the place for her wedding reception, the event center for their wedding reception.
It's in Fridley, but it's only like 14, 15 minutes from downtown Minneapolis.
Yeah, that's right. It's just up East River Road. It's this side of 694. So, listen, they've got all this great stuff, and now they've got a Sunday night baseball thing going on, where Sunday nights it's $4 for one of their beers, and you just watching the Sunday night baseball game, 6 to 9 p.m. We know some people who like baseball. We know some people who like beer. They should probably just check out Forgotten Star. What do you think?
Forgotten Star Brewing. Go check it out.
A matchup between two perennial FCS powers, North Dakota State and Eastern Washington, will be played at U.S. Bank Stadium opening weekend of the 2023 college football season, September 2nd. At a KFN.com keyword contest to enter for your chance to win a pair of Delta Club tickets.
Went to one of those games at Target Field, I think 2-3 years ago. The NDSU, I think, was facing not a perennial football power. It was the Butler University Bulldogs, who I think had just started Division II football. I got to tell you, it was pretty entertaining. NDSU can pack a stadium. They packed Target Field that day. It was a good day downtown.
I saw St. John's versus St. Thomas.
Oh, yeah. They played at Target Field as well.
Yeah, I got somehow into a suite and they had alcohol, so I don't really remember what happened, but it was interesting to watch the football.
That is
being
on
played.
brand for St. Thomas versus St. John's.
Oh, my God. I never saw a tailgate situation like this. Because what you had was current
There's
students.
no place to tailgate around there.
Oh, believe me, they've found a way. Because just the whole, they had current students who,
Sure, tailgate.
Yeah, but also they were just 50-year-old dudes who went.
Of course.
That was whose suite I got into because I know a few of them. And it was they were like, oh my God, there's actual current students. Let's go nuts with them. Because for them, it was the once a year for the regular students. Anyway, we're going to talk about the lineup. But what stood out was basically the Byron Buxton show during this. I mean, he had 2 hits in all 3 games. He made a number of plays with his legs that, A, no one else could make, and B, most other people wouldn't even attempt.
Right.
He stretched a single into a double, took a header in this second base, almost knocked his face off. But pushed the envelope there and got an extra base on it. Yeah. He hit a triple.
Right.
And the first triple of the season for the Twins into the right center field gap. Right. That wasn't the prettiest slide either.
No, it wasn't the nicest dive attempt to catch the ball either.
True.
That looked like it hurt as well.
But the big one that really stood out to me was Game 2 Saturday when he's on third base.
Okay, but now what about the play on second base?
What about the play on second
The
base?
second base, he ends up taking third base on that play when he runs in front of it.
Yes.
Takes third base
But that's
on a
what-
ball in front of him. Now,
That's what I meant by he attempts to do things as a
Right.
base runner that other people would never even attempt. Now, you can.
should not ever.
Well, right.
attempt.
But that's the
Right.
thing. It's like,
Right.
should most people go out on a random weekday and drink 10 beers and with their wife and then go home in the morning and do a podcast at 8 a.m.? No. But John Bonus does that like
Sure.
3-4 times
some
a week.
Of us are, some of us are,
Right.
some of
You're
us are.
special.
Right, exactly.
You have a
right.
special
Yeah,
tool set.
It is a matter of training. It's a
Right.
special skills
Right.
You're correct.
To John,
Right.
that's just called Wednesday. To Byron Buxton, breaking for third on a ball hit to the infield is you start to scream, no, 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 yes. Because
Right, yeah, that's right.
he
Yeah.
got there and it was a
Got
bang
a
bang
little
play.
Rosario to him.
Yeah, that's true. The thing you don't want to see is when Gilberto Celestino last year took that
Right,
same
yeah,
approach
exactly.
and it didn't work that well.
No,
So that's
you're right.
he's on third, and Saturday's game, it's I think 1-0 at that point.
Yeah, I think you're
And
right.
Kyle Farmer comes off the bench, pinch hits, and hits a very shallow fly ball to center field. And so shallow, in fact, that when the camera showed Byron Buxton kind of jogging back to third base to tag up, I just assumed he's going to bluff a tag because
Right,
that's
of
sort
course.
of what you
That's what
want
you
to
do,
do
right.
in that spot when the ball is barely hit over second base. It's barely to the center fielder.
Right.
Even the fastest man in the world is generally going to go back to third. You tag up, you try to make a very sudden movement towards home as a bluff or a fake to try to draw a strong throw from the center fielder. And 1 out of 100 times, maybe that throw goes to the backstop and you get a free run out of it, basically.
Right.
Instead, because he's Byron Buxton and he's incredibly fast and he's willing to take risks, and what I thought really stood out here was his instincts on this play and his sort of baseball IQ on this play, which I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for because he's such a fantastic, skilled athlete. Right. I think it's easy to look at a player like Buxton and say, well, he's just, everything comes naturally to him, and it does. But I also have been impressed over the years with him making plays like this. And so here's what happened. Kansas City center fielder Isbell goes to catch it and assumes what I also assume, which is that all he's doing is bluffing at third.
Right.
Catches it flat-footed,
Right.
where he's not sort of charging the ball.
Right.
At which point Buxton says, I'm going to go for home.
Yep.
This guy's not prepared for
Yep.
me. He's not realizing it's Byron Buxton. Even with the bad knee, even as a DH kind of ramping up to the season, he could still put the Jets on. And so as soon as he saw their center fielder not getting in position to kind of put his full weight behind the catch in preparation or anticipation for making a throw, he just took off for home. And he completely surprised the center fielder, who basically just lobbed the ball back into the middle of the infield a little bit.
Yeah.
The throw, by the way, the ball never got to the plate,
No, it never did. It got cut off. It's,
which is incredible.
Right.
Like Salvador Perez, the Royals catcher, just stands up with his arms up and is like, "What happened here?"
I think he started sort of lobbing it, then realized it was serious and tried to put something behind it. By then, it was a little bit too late. I don't know what Isbell's arm situation is. Like, I don't know
I don't
really
think
what
it's
you
bad.
expect out of that.
Yeah.
The Twins have Michael Taylor on their team, who was the center fielder for the Royals last year.
True. Yeah.
I wondered if Michael Taylor
Gave him a little
enjoyed,
scouting
I
report.
wonder if Michael Taylor enjoyed watching that particular thing.
Yeah,
Like,
because Michael Taylor has an
you traded me
exceptional
away,
arm.
huh? Yeah, you
Yeah.
traded me away, and now
Gold
look at
Glove
this.
winner.
Here comes the insurance run over there while you guys are lollygagging it into the infield.
But I was super impressed by that play from Buxton, just from an instinctual level. It's it's combining baseball intelligence, aggressiveness, and obviously being incredibly fast. You need all three parts to make that happen. He made at least 3 plays with his legs during the opening series that led directly to runs in spots where those runs really mattered.
Right.
At the time, certainly they really mattered. And what's interesting is he's beginning this season as a designated hitter. He's back there tonight. I
Right.
just saw the lineup. It's the same as the opening day lineup we just saw get posted. And I know that is worrisome to people. The reason for it is he battled knee problems all last year. He's also just been incredibly injured over the course of his entire career. And he's healthy, but they want to kind of ramp him up to the point that hopefully midseason or maybe as soon as next month, he's taking regular time in center field in addition to some time at DH. But for now, at least, it's going to be purely DH for him. And I know people go, well, how can you agree? He's a Gold Glove winning center fielder.
Right.
A healthy Byron Buxton is the greatest center fielder I've personally ever seen. And we've seen some good ones for the Twins
Right.
and against the Twins over the years. How can you take away that value? You're sort of cutting off half his value.
Right.
And I think that's largely true, but I'll say 2 things about that. One is this current version of Buxton is not as fast as he used to be. He's 29 instead of 22. He's had knee problems. He's had health problems. He's not at 100% now. They're kind of ramping up to hopefully get that point. So he's a very good and possibly great center fielder now, but he's not the greatest. And you just mentioned Michael Taylor, who is a Gold Glove winning center fielder. If anybody is on the level of Buxton defensively, it's Michael Taylor.
Right.
So there's not a huge drop-off defensively. Now, the drop-off is by playing Buxton at DH and Taylor in center field, you're basically swapping a normal DH bat, whoever that might be, for Michael Taylor, who's been batting ninth, rightfully for the Twins. He's not much of a hitter.
Right.
But what I'll also say is you're taking away what Buxton can do defensively, but you're hoping to have him in the lineup more. And by the way, he started each of the first 4 games, and I realize that doesn't seem like a lot. But for Byron Buxton, 4 consecutive games, even at designated hitter, is noteworthy.
Yeah. On our Patreon that we have, one of the things we do regularly is we take, for years, we tried to actually do mailbags at the end of our regular shows. And what ends up talking is we end up talking too much baseball, and we get to the end and we don't have any time for the mailbag. And so we would promise people a mailbag and never be able to do it. So we finally decided in the Patreon, one of the things that we're going to be able to do is have all mailbag shows, and the only people who can ask questions are the patrons themselves. Right? Yeah. So this last week we had one, and because Buxton is DH, we got a question that I really liked. The question was something like, if you had the choice of having a full season, as many games as you want, of Byron Buxton at DH versus, Buxton in center field for as long as Buxton lasts.
Right, you're just taking your chances.
You're just taking your chances. Whether it is 70 games or 90 games or 105 games, whatever it is, right? Which would you prefer, right? Well, I mean, the answer statistically is probably we'll take Buxton in center field because when you've got. But I mean, you can take a look at it this way. You can say, listen, you've got 2 spots. You got center field and DH, right? So would you rather have Buxton for half a season and Taylor for half a season
in center
field, right? And then your average DH,
right?
An average, which is usually a pretty good hitter, right? Or would you rather have Buxton as DH and then Taylor in center field for the whole year, right? And it's not totally true. It's not totally clear to me which one of those 2 you choose. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think once upon a time that would have been a real toss-up of a question, but I do think that Buxton's hitting has improved so much, particularly now he's had some slumps when he's clearly banged up and playing through a significant injury that have dragged down his overall numbers. But I looked over the last 4 years, he has a .560 slugging percentage over the last 4 years, which is, I think, second or third in all of baseball behind like Mike Trout and maybe Aaron Judge. And so once upon a time, I do think this would have been a very interesting debate. But I think if you can somehow guarantee, which obviously you can't, but if you could somehow guarantee 130, 140, 150 games just by making him a pure DH, I do think his offense, his hitting has gotten to the point that it is not just a good hitter. He's a legitimately great power hitter, particularly if you can avoid some of the nagging injuries that have dragged down his overall numbers.
So this was my point. When that question was asked, I was like, I think I would lean towards the center field piece of it, right? Just because I like watching him play center field. Well, that's part of it, right?
Yes.
Like,
aesthetically, it's one of the greatest things to watch.
That's right. Then I watched the 3 games in Kansas City, and I thought, boy, having this in the lineup on an everyday basis, even if I don't get to watch him in center field, even if it means having to watch Michael Taylor bat every 9 batters, which I don't enjoy. Right. Now, he's fine.
He'll
whatever.
Be fine.
I'm not trying to be over
250 with 8 homers.
He is what he is. And what he is, I mean, they did a nice job of taking a starting center fielder for last year on a bad team, bring him over and put him into a position where he can be sort of the backup center fielder. I totally respect that. But one of the things that occurred to me after these 3 games was something that Ted Wiedmer, Twins Daily, wrote about a month and a half ago. And basically he said, who is the shift limitations that's going to help the most? And one of the things he pointed out was everybody talks about how it affects the left-handed hitters, right? Gallo and Kepler and stuff, it's going to help them. The person who has pulled the ball the most in Major League Baseball is Byron Buxton. And what I saw this weekend confirmed it. I saw him just not being afraid to having several hits that just go through the left side of the infield because you don't have the shortstop back in the grass. You don't have second baseman over there helping things out. I think he is I think one of the reasons we're seeing a better hitter right now is because he's not afraid to just go and pull the ball as hard as he wants that way.
I don't think he's ever been afraid by that. Also, he'll be less effective than most because he doesn't hit ground balls usually.
Well, you're right. He does hit a lot of it. But what we saw this weekend was the ground balls that he's hitting are getting through.
Yeah, but also right-handed hitters don't see the same type of shifts that left-handed hitters do. You're not going to see three guys on the left side typically. You're going to see the shortstop deeper, which is a whole different issue.
You see the shortstop a lot deeper, and you don't have that.
Except
you can't have the shortstop.
They're not throwing
anymore.
Buxton out anyway.
Well,
from deep shortstop on a hard ground ball to the hole.
As hard as he hits the ground ball, I think you could get a pretty decent shot at it.
He did, I should note, hit into his first double play. It was a bang play, and they actually had to go to replay and overturn the initial safe call at first base. It was his first double play grounded into since August 18th, 2020.
I was going to say, I remember one a couple of years ago.
I have two stats on that 3 years ago. I have two stats on that blew my mind. One is in between grounding into double plays, Byron Buxton hit 55 home runs in between double plays, which is in the history of baseball, that's the most home runs anybody has ever hit between double plays.
Okay.
I looked it up.
Is that from StatHead?
Yeah, stathead.com. And the other stat that was amazing is during that same period from between August 19th, 2020 and 2 days ago when he grounded into a double play,
right,
there were 5 different major leaguers who hit into at least 40 double plays, including 2 who hit 50 or more double plays in the time Buxton had 0 and hit 55 homers. Jose Abreu grounded into 52 double plays.
Wow.
During a time when Buxton grounded into none, and then Vlad Guerrero Jr. grounded into 50. Now, they have
that surprised me because both those guys don't strike me as ground ball hitters either.
No, but
you know what I mean?
slow right-handed pull hitters
Right,
will always hit into a lot of double. Harmon Killebrew, Michael Kadire, those type of guys. Not that those two are in the same category, but you get the gist of that.
Right.
But to the point that we were just talking about, you remove center field, and I do think the plan that they would like to have is at some point, perhaps as soon as next month, Buxton will start playing some center field. They haven't ruled out him as a center fielder. Right. I'm just somewhat skeptical that once you make him a DH, and if it's working well, and if he's staying healthy, and if Taylor's playing good defense and holding his own at least at the bottom of the lineup,
right,
do you really want to mess with that? But you're going to see Byron
I'm
Buxton.
wondering about that. Do you think we're actually going to have some discussions in mid-May about whether or not they really want to go back to that or whether they want to just keep Buxton at DH?
I mean, probably if there's a legitimate argument to be made about that, that means Byron Buxton has been very healthy,
right,
and very productive at DH.
Correct.
If you're at the point where you're saying, okay, is it safe now to incorporate him back into the defense? But just on this topic, the fact that he can still, first of all, he's become a legitimately great hitter. And I think his overall numbers are exceptional over the last 3 or 4 years. It makes him one of the maybe dozen best hitters in the American League. And I actually think those kind of shortchange him because within those overall numbers, there are like 2 for 40 slumps where his knee has clearly limited him, but he's out there.
Right.
And so if you assume that he can stay healthier on a day-to-day basis as DH, you can kind of eliminate some of those slumps that drag down the overall numbers, and that makes him an even better hitter. And the fact that he can still cause such havoc as a base runner, not a base stealer, which he rarely does, although he might a little bit more because we're going to talk later in the show about the rules changes that have caused teams to double their stolen base attempts compared to last year with frequency. So maybe Buxton gets in on the act a little bit, stealing bases because of that. But for the most part, he's decided it's not worth the health risk to try to go from first to second, even though, by the way, he has the best stolen base percentage in the history of Major League Baseball, essentially 90%.
Yeah.
But he doesn't even need to steal bases. Him going first to third or stretching singles and doubles or stretching doubles into triples or, honestly, tagging up on a 200-foot fly ball to center field when no one else would even have the guts, let alone the wheels to get that done.
Right.
You start to see that his impact as a hitter is great.
Right.
Over the last 3 or 4 years, he looks nothing like the hitter he was when he first came up. And he was just all knees and elbows and swinging at sliders.
And, I mean, how silly does it look when we think back to like 2017, 2018, where it was like, oh, no, he's going to be somebody who puts the ball in play and he tries to beat things out and so on. And like, he is, I think his body type fools people. People still think he is.
Well, people want to take, if you're the fastest guy in the world, people want you to be a leadoff man. And when you're a leadoff man, people want you to bunt and hit on the ground and try to beat out infield singles and steal bases. And that works for a lot of players. But when you can hit the ball 450 feet consistently, let it rip.
He's one of these guys where if you look at his body type and you look at his stats, you've got a better idea of who he is from his stats than from his body type. I feel like, what he is he's a slugger.
Yes.
Like he's just a pure slugger, a pure right-handed
who happens to be
slugger.
Skinny and the fastest guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And I think that's fooled people throughout his career, right? And I think even
fooled Paul Molitor, by the way. You mentioned 2017, 2016.
Right, yeah.
Paul Molitor, who was a Hall of Fame player,
right.
was back in camp, by the way, with the Twins because he's a base running guru, and Rocco Baldelli brought him back in, which I thought was interesting, the man he replaced. He's such a high IQ, kind of beloved, not just locally, but sort of viewed as a guru. And yet when he was managing Byron Buxton, looked at exactly what you just said and thought, man, this guy weighs 180 pounds. He's the fastest guy I've ever seen.
Right.
What we're going to have him do is bunt and hit ground balls and try to beat out singles, and then we're going to have him steal. And at times that looked okay.
And hit the opposite way.
Right, go the opposite way.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, and he had some injuries, and he was just developing, and there were all kinds of problems with Buxton offensively that kind of short-circuited his.
Right.
But over the last 4 years, which I do think coincides with Baldelli taking over as manager and new hitting coaches and just a approach to hitters especially that the Twins take, which is play to your strengths. If you are incredibly fast and you weigh $190,
right,
but you can hit the crap out of the ball, go ahead and try to hit.
Hit the crap out of the ball. Let's do that.
I think of Jose Altuve for the Astros, who's about 5'2".
Yes, right.
And in the minors, he had very little power, but he would hit like 330 every year. And he got to the majors, and his first couple of years in the majors, he'd hit 300, he'd steal bases, and he'd have like 4 homers.
Right.
And then at some point, the Astros were like, you make good contact, you hit line drives. What if we just had you kind of try to elevate the ball? And people were like, well, don't ruin him. You're going to ruin him. Well, what they turned him into is a Hall of Fame caliber player, basically. And so I think that's the progression Buxton has kind of made, which was he can still make an impact with his legs. He can still, like you said, line singles all over the place when he's going well. He's still a stolen base threat when he's feeling good. But they're kind of unleashing the full scope of his power potential and not having him feel like he's doing something wrong when he's trying to hit home runs. And if you look,
and I wonder if the next step for that is, just keep him at DH.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
it's
not the worst, but the problem though is really over the last, like he's had so many injuries that we need to compartmentalize them.
Right.
But over, let's say his last 5 injuries, maybe one of them has come defensively in center field.
Yeah, maybe.
A lot of these have come.
Dives, he runs into the wall.
Right, but I mean, he got hurt in Boston last year, sliding into second base. He's had a couple of hit problems running to first.
Yeah.
And now maybe that's wear and tear from diving in center field and crashing into the wall and all that. But, I think this is definitely something that is going to be revisited 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, next month, if he's still healthy, if he's still playing well. And by the way, if something happens to Taylor, if he struggles or gets hurt, then you're looking at someone like Nick Gordon in center field or Joey Gallo in center field. Then it maybe becomes a little bit more appealing to push Buxton back into that role on a part-time basis. And we saw him DH plenty last year, but that was more reactive instead of proactive. Last year it was, oh no, his knee's really a problem. Let's try to squeeze the most value out of him we can by having him DH. This year it's, what if we start him out at the DH and maybe keep him at the DH, but we'll kind of play it by ear. And so, certainly through one series, the fact that he's back in the lineup for the 4th straight game, like I said, for most players, that's not a big deal. But the fact that Buxton's in there 4 consecutive games, that's owed a lot to being a DH instead of being a center fielder /DH.
You referenced Michael Taylor, and then you also referenced the backup plans that we have for Michael Taylor and for Byron Buxton in general. And when we get back, let's talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that has been absolutely a focus of the offseason and apparent in the Kansas City Royals series is how the Twins are using their depth and how they went about gathering their depth and how they're using it not just to get past the injury bugaboo that they've had the last couple of years, but to actually make other managers make mistakes during games. We'll talk about that when we get back on The Fan.
We've got a new sponsor, but it's a new sponsor for us, but it's not a new app for me, because I discovered Game Time for buying tickets back in 2019. 2019 when the Twins were doing really well, and I think might have been opening day on 2019. I had been recommended. Somebody said, psst, check out the Game Time app because it's last minute tickets.
Yeah, their specialty is sort of last minute, last second, hard to find, where you're freaked out, you need the tickets, and it's like, I don't know where to turn to. Turn to Game Time. It shouldn't be that stressful to get tickets, not only for games, but music, comedy, theater, all that stuff. They have deals on last-minute tickets. They have a best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing and start getting hyped for the fun you're going to have.
And for us, if you could just download the Game Time app, then you create an account and use the code Gleeman, you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem your code Gleeman, $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Listen to the Power Trip Morning Show all week this week for your chance to win a pair of tickets. See Stained at Treasure Island September 9th. Tickets are on sale now. You head to KFA.com, keyword calendar for more information.
And welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek. I spent the break recovering from advocating that I don't want to see Byron Buxton in center field. That shook me up a little bit to come to that realization, Eric Gleeman.
Weird stuff happens when you get in this radio studio and the mics turn on. You just start to say all kinds of strange things.
That's the
The pressure of live radio.
That is correct.
So you wanted to talk a little bit about the bench, which I thought there were a couple moments.
It was just such a focus of the offseason.
Right.
We talked a lot, and listen, so much of the offseason was about, getting Correa back, granted, right?
Sure.
And I think we almost overlooked the fact that they also signed the second best catcher on the free agent market, Christian Vasquez. So I can't believe we're not talking about that at all. But, they went out and they traded for Michael Taylor. They traded for Kyle Farmer. And then they signed Donovan Solano, a week into spring training.
Yeah.
All three were regulars on kind of crummy teams last year, right? Who now have been brought in to be
Part-timers.
Part-timers. Each has, some exceptional skill that lends itself
but they're
well to the
limited
team.
as everyday players.
But they're limited as
like
everyday
we talked
players.
about with Taylor,
Right.
if he's the everyday center fielder, he's somewhat limited.
And I like that they sort of identified that if you are a bad team and you've got a player like that on it, it's hard to get any value for that player. Nobody's really interested in that player. The good teams don't need that player, right? Because they've got good players.
And the other bad teams aren't giving up.
Aren't giving up anything for a veteran
Right.
like that costs. But for a good team that is looking for depth because they had so many injuries last year, that's perfect. And they ended up, and between Michael Taylor's defense and Kyle Farmer's, versatility and ability to hit left-handed pitching, and Donovan Solano just barreling up baseballs left and right. Like, that's a real interesting trio to have on your bench. And then when you use them the same way, first of all, it helps when it's nice to have that when you've got injuries like Polanco suddenly isn't
The
going to be
unfortunate
starting, right?
thing is they stockpiled all this depth, and you have Buxton now at DH, so Taylor is now the starting center fielder until proven otherwise, and then Kirilloff is out and Polanco is out, and so now all of a sudden you're having a platoon.
Your two
Nick Gordon.
infielders and your outfielder are all different spots than you thought they were, and you've got two infielders and an outfielder on the roster.
On one hand, that really makes it very obvious that the depth was needed.
Right.
The flip side is you'd like to wait a month or two before you had to really tap into it, because now if another injury happens, then you're digging down to the minors. But what I thought was interesting in the opening series, and we may see it again today, because Gordon is the way to replace Polanco at second base, who's a switch hitter. If you're going to do it with veteran major leaguers as opposed to like Ed Julian or something like that, who I think they feel needs a little bit more seasoning at AAA, you can essentially replicate what you get from just Polanco via two players in a platoon.
Right.
And we've seen it so far, which is Nick Gordon has started now each of the first 4 games at second base because they faced a right-handed starting pitcher in all of them. They're actually not going to face a lefty for the first time until Wednesday, the last game of the Miami series. Jesus Luzardo is a lefty.
Okay.
So that's the first chance we'll get to see what is their intended righty-heavy versus lefty lineups.
Right. Which, by the way, has been a real problem for the Twins. It's been for the last 3 years.
But has the potential to be a strength this season.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But we'll get to that too. But you faced all righties so far, and that has meant Nick Gordon batting sixth, playing second base because he's a left-handed hitter. But he's platooning with Kyle Farmer at second base, who's a right-handed hitter who, like you said, can play. He played shortstop for the Reds. He can play all over the place. And people often just think of a platoon as the starting lineup. When a righty's on the mound, Gordon starts because he's a lefty bat. when they face a lefty a couple days from now, you're probably going to see Kyle Farmer or maybe Solano start at second base because they're a righty bat. But platoons also can play out during games.
Right.
And we saw that in all 3 games against Kansas City.
Right.
In the middle innings, 5th, 6th, 7th inning, those are the middle innings. It wasn't late.
Yeah, but not saving for the 8th and 9th. Right.
And I actually think Baldelli getting aggressive there can kind of catch opposing managers a little flat-footed, similar to Buxton and Isbell with a center fielder, where they're just kind of pressing buttons. And in all 3 games, the Royals manager, who's a rookie, brought in a left-handed middle reliever, Amir Garrett twice and Ryan Yarborough the third time, to face Gordon because Gordon and another lefty, Joey Gallo, who we're going to talk about a lot coming up here, were back-to-back in the lineup, 6 and 7.
Right.
And so it's very enticing. I think actually Baldelli did this on purpose to entice a manager to say, ooh, there's 2 lefties coming up. Let me bring in my left-handed middle reliever. Now, the problem from the Royals standpoint is once you do that, you're assuming because it's the 5th or 6th inning that Baldelli's not going to unload his bench yet. It's too early for that. But he got aggressive, and he did it all 3 times.
Yep.
And once the left-handed reliever comes in to face Gordon and Gallo, they have to stay in to face at least 3 batters.
Right.
It's the 3-batter minimum rule, which is in place for the last 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And so Baldelli knows this. And so what did he do? He pinch hit Kyle Farmer for Gordon. And on opening day, he then pinch hit Solano for Gallo.
Right.
And in the first time they did it on opening day, Farmer walked, and then Solano hit an RBI single, and it increased the lead from 1-0 to 2-0, and that was huge.
Right.
Then,
and as a result, Amir Garrett, who's the left-handed reliever of Kansas City, had to face 4. He came in to face 4 right-handed batters in a row. He didn't get to face a left-handed batter till they got back to the top of the lineup when he's facing Max Kepler.
Because what it does, the bench having quality right-handed bats or left, like when they face a lefty and Farmer starts at second base, you're then going to have Nick Gordon on the bench as a mid-game move that you can bring a left-handed bat off the bench for. Having quality hitters on the bench, especially compared to last year, when their bench was just a disaster.
Well, especially in like September.
Right.
But I mean, it wasn't great all year. But usually, and I think we've often advocated for this. You want that bench to often be young players that you want to give some at bats to. Nick Gordon is a good example of the kind of person we liked to see on that bench for a while. But the problem is that, first of all, those players, if there's injuries, those players end up getting a lot of time. And then if there's injuries on top of injuries, well, now you're already down in AAA dealing with, Mark Contreras, God bless him, or
players
Rob
like
Refsnyder, or like all these different people that we saw take at bats in Major League Baseball games during critical parts of the season.
And by having good guys on the bench, good veteran quality players, particularly with specific skill sets that you can kind of limit their exposure to righties if they're a righty, but you can use them in key spots against lefties. Right. It gives a weapon to Baldelli so that he's the one dictating the matchups ultimately. Like, yes, the opposing manager is the one who brings in the lefty, but he has buttons to push then to kind of push back against that. And if you catch the other team in the right circumstances and you're willing to unload your bench in the 6th inning and play for that spot right there and figure it out after that, you can get a left-handed middle reliever in a real bad spot, like you described with Garrett, where he's brought in to face back-to-back lefties and instead faces 4 consecutive righties. And it could have gotten much worse for him on opening day. And so I think the ability to have right-handed bats like Farmer and Solano who thrive when you can match them up against left-handed pitchers as starters, as bench players, whatever. And the flip side is when a lefty is starting, you're going to have guys like Gallo or guys like Gordon or someone like Max Kepler or Trevor Larnach, left-handed hitters on your bench then against left-handed starters, but they're going to be mid-game weapons then for Baldelli. And that is such a huge change from what we've seen last year or even in previous years. And I think Baldelli's willingness to get aggressive in the 5th, 6th, or 7th inning and not hold these moves back for situations that may never occur. I think is really helpful.
I wonder if that strategy will change when he's facing different teams. Like, it's easy to take a look at the Royals and say, boy, they've got this thing about left-handed middle relievers that they tend to pull in, longer relievers and so on. And that seems to be sort of the soft underbelly. That seems to be the time that you want to strike. Maybe you're a little more hesitant to do that versus a team that's got a little deeper bullpen. And then maybe you do want to save Kyle Farmer because they've got a good left-handed reliever that you're going to see in the 8th inning, and that's when you want to pull Nick Gordon out.
Maybe. I mean, you're going to always, like they're facing Miami now. They will definitely focus on who are the relievers, where are they likely to pitch, how many lefties are there, what are the tendencies of Miami in terms of when they like to bring them in. The problem with, I agree with you, there are some circumstances where it's the 5th or 6th inning and you're going to let Gordon hit against a lefty because you want to save Solano or Farmer or whoever for a later spot. But the problem with saving him for a later spot is you don't know how that game is going to go. Not only do you need the game to still be close, that's a high leverage opportunity to make up for not using him in the 5th or 6th inning, but you need it to, that specific part of the lineup has to come up in the 8th or 9th inning. Because if it's the top of the lineup, Kyle Farmer's not going to pinch hit for those guys anyway. Right. And if it's the bottom of the lineup, it's not as seamless to pinch hit him for the catcher spot or for Taylor in center field. Then you have to juggle the defense. The beauty of having a Gordon Farmer platoon at second base is you can maximize them offensively, and then you bring in Farmer for the late innings, and he's actually a better defender than Gordon. And Solano at first base, probably not at the level of Gallo, who's a very good defensive first baseman, as we saw, but he's a pretty solid first baseman.
You can decide whether or not you're going to use that trump card early or use that trump card late, whichever you think. What do you want to talk about when we get back, Mr. Gleeman?
We should probably talk about Joey Gallo at some point.
Let's do that.
How many
that was
does he
nice
have
to
to
see.
hit
That was
to get us to talk about
All right.
it.
Joey Gallo when we get back. But first, let's hear about a cash contest.
That's right. The Fan and BigDeck.com want to give you a shot at $1,000 in your hand with their national cash contest. At KFAN.com, enter the keyword grand. That's grand for your shot at that $1,000. KFAN.com, keyword grand. More.
We have been supporters of StatHead since there's been a StatHead.
100%. I've been paying for this product long before they became a sponsor, and I would pay double, triple.
I mean, we were big promoters of their original,
which was called the Play Index.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
Baseball Reference.
That's
now
right.
it's StatHead. You can either get it through baseballreference.com, which is the greatest website in the history of mankind, or stathead.com, which they also have. It'll take you right to it. And here's what I always say. If you've been reading my tweets as the opening weekend and you see all these weird stats that I'm tweeting out, it's the first time since 62 that they did this. First time in history, back-to-back shutouts. And all. You go, how could he possibly know that? StatHead is how I know that.
It takes doing database querying into a really simple place. Like, open up this sheet, click on some radio buttons, pull it back, and suddenly you've got the top, every Major League Baseball player and how they did versus left-handers over the last 3 years.
It's amazing. You can truly look up anything, and believe me, I put this thing to the test in terms of looking up weird stuff. So stathead.com, or you can get it on Baseball Reference. It's your all-access tool to go inside the entire Baseball Reference database, and use the promo code Gleeman when you buy it, and you will get $20 off your annual subscription to any of the StatHead single sports or the all sports, which I subscribe to the all sports because I like to do it for basketball too. Discounts cannot be applied to monthly subs, but $20 off, stathead.com. Use the promo code Gleeman.
The Twins home opener is this Thursday, and Corey Cove will be hanging out at Cargo Bar inside Target Center 1 to 3, helping you celebrate the return of baseball to Minneapolis. Come hang out, enter to win a great prize. Learn more at KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
And welcome back. Gleeman and the Geek. We were treated to the first big Joey Gallo performance in yesterday's game after a couple games of sluggish hitting, I guess I would say, by the Twins, but at least not a lot of clutch hitting by the Twins, which is maybe something to be concerned about as we go forward. I don't know. We'll see how the run scoring on this. This isn't a team. This is a team that's missing, Polanco, missing Kirilloff. We talked a lot about the depth. The depth is nice, but there's some peak players that were on this team last year. Polanco, Arise, Kirilloff, et cetera, that are missing. And one of the replacements for that was supposed to be Joey Gallo, who they were going to help bounce back from about a 1 1/3 real down seasons with mostly the Yankees, a little bit with the Dodgers. It's definitely somebody who can be compared to a Miguel Sano type hitter, left-handed versus right-handed, but somebody who's maybe low batting average, but somebody who can, when he connects, is going to go a long ways, gets a lot of walks.
He's polarizing.
He's a polarizing figure similar to Sano.
I use this stat a lot when I was asked about Gallo when they initially signed him, which is Miguel Sano has the second highest strikeout rate in the history of Major League Baseball in terms of percentage of plate appearances ending in strikeout. The only player with significant playing time in the majors who has struck out more often than Miguel Sano is Joey Gallo. Now, on one hand, it seems cruel for the Twins to do that, given the level of frustration associated with Sano in this fan base. And
that's fair.
They finally...
And I would suggest internally as well.
Yeah. Sure, they were plenty frustrated with Sano the last couple of years too, and they finally part ways, and you have fans going, hallelujah. They're finally going to get a guy who might have some power and doesn't strike out 200 times, and no, they replaced him with a literal 199 career hitter in Joey Gallo, who has the highest strikeout rate in the history of baseball. Now, the thing that differentiates, in my mind, and in the Twins' mind, Gallo from Sano, there are a few things. One is Gallo is a 2-time Gold Glove winning outfielder, and the metrics agree with the eye test on
Correct.
that. Now, you look at him, and he's massive, not unlike Sano.
Right.
He's 6'5". He's, say sturdy, and yet he has an incredible arm. He came up as a third baseman in the Rangers system when Thad Levine was the Rangers assistant GM, current Twins GM. And he's been he's won a Gold Glove in right, and he's won a Gold Glove in left. He's occasionally played some center, and now, as we've seen, he can play first base very well, too. The other thing is he's huge like Sano, but he's a very good athlete. Not that Sano was a bad athlete. Sano
No, he was an exceptional athlete.
For his size, Sano was actually a great athlete. But Joey Gallo has a reputation as a very good, aggressive base runner, in addition to being a great outfielder defensively, and the Twins feel a potentially Gold Glove caliber first baseman defensively. Now he's filling in for Alex Kirilloff, so that shows his versatility there. But the overall offensive game is, there's going to be, even in Joey Gallo is a 2-time All-Star. I should look up what his batting average was. Let me see this. In the 2 years he was an All-Star. So he was an All-Star, by the way, as recently as 2021. He won he won a Gold Glove and made an All-Star team in 20.
It was later that year that he got traded to the Yankees, and things sort of declined quickly.
So he's a 2-time All-Star and a 2-time Gold Glove winner, and he's only 29.
Right.
His first All-Star season in 2019 for the Rangers, he hit 253. His second All-Star season in 2021 with the Rangers and then the Yankees, he batted 199. And so at the risk of being in the preposterous statement tournament, he made the All-Star team in a season when he hit 199. If he hits 225.
No, he wasn't hitting 199 when he made the All-Star team, just so we're clear.
Correct.
Right. That was.
Do you know what his batting average was for the Rangers when he did make the All-Star team at the All-Star break?
At the All-Star break?
223.
Yeah.
So when I say he can be an All-Star hitting 225, now people are going to scoff at that. And aesthetically, there's a certain segment of the fan base that understandably hates that type of hitter. And I get frustrated watching that type of hitter too. Even in Miguel Sano's very good seasons, of which he made an All-Star team. He was great in 2019. He was great in 2017 before he got hurt. People still were frustrated by and often criticized him, I felt unfairly at that time, because he would hit 240 or 250. But he drew a ton of walks to keep the on-base percentage high, and he had incredible power. He hit 30, 40 homers. Gallo is a similar type of player from the left side in that he's had 100 walk seasons before. He's led the league in walks before.
111 walks in the year you're talking about.
Right. So he's an extremely patient hitter. He gets into deep counts, and his strikeouts are not because he's an undisciplined hitter. It's actually because he gets into these deep counts with 2 strikes, 3-2, 3-1, 2-2, and he's only got one shot at a swing to put the ball in play, and he has a high, swing and miss rate because he's going for power. But
that's right. He doesn't shorten up the swing. He doesn't choke up. He doesn't try to take it to the opposite field. He's trying to hit it out of the park every time he hits a ball that sees a ball that he is in the zone.
David Popkins, the now second-year hitting coach for the Twins, has tried to make some adjustments with Gallo in terms of, kind of his batting stance and his approach. They've widened his base a little bit in search of a little bit more contact or a little bit more consistent contact, believing that, you might eliminate 10% of the power in favor of 10% more contact, but there's plenty of power to spare, as we saw. So he goes 0 for 6 with 4 strikeouts in the first 2 games, and you go, well, that's the Joey Gallo experience.
Getting pulled midway through the first game.
Although he made a great play at first base to start the 3-2-4 double play, which you don't often see.
That is a good point. You're right.
Which got Pablo Lopez out of a big jam.
Yes, it did.
Then in game 3, you saw the highs of Joey Gallo, which was he almost hit their first homer of the season in the 4th inning.
Right.
He lined a double off the right center field wall.
Certainly had the exit velocity. It just didn't have the angle, launch angle. Right, yeah.
Then he comes up in the 6th inning, and he does hit their first homer of the season. Basically the same spot, just rips it down the right field line, 430 feet or something like that. Then he comes up again in the 7th inning, hits their second homer of the season.
3-run homer, and even further.
That was demolished. Right. So he was about 3 feet from having the 3-homer game. Instead has to settle for, I think it was 16th career multi-homer game for him. And that's the highs that you're living through the lows to get to. Right. And ultimately, for this to be a successful signing, it's a 1-year, $11 million deal. You're betting on a comeback from a player who 2 years ago was an all-star, 4 years ago was an all-star, is a good fielder who can play first or the corner spots in the outfield. He's a good base runner. Is he going to hit 275? No. There's almost no scenario where, I mean, if Joey Gallo hits 275, he'll be an MVP candidate. If he hits 250, he'll be an MVP candidate. If he hits 225,
or he'll have somehow sacrificed all this power.
Well, right.
Like
I mean,
that,
something
weird.
Aliens have landed on
but,
the.
I mean, your point is that Populous adjustments that we're talking about, we're not talking about trying to retool somebody's swing here, right? What we're trying to do is just make enough contact so that instead of hitting 200, you're hitting 230 or 225, something like that. That's not a huge change to. That's not necessarily a huge change to a huge adjustment to make.
No, and it's more mechanical, it seems, than versus approach-wise. Like approach I view as more mental. Like what are you trying to do at the plate? Are you swinging early in counts? Are you going late in counts? This one is we're going to widen his base. We're going to use his hips more and his legs more. Because as you saw, when he connects, like Sano had this too, believe me. But when Joey Gallo connects, the ball just like explodes off his bat. And he just puts swings on the ball that the double and the 2 homers that we saw in Game 3 versus Kansas City, I mean, these balls were just like shot out of a cannon.
Right.
And he has true 99th or 100th percentile power, similar to Sano, but I would say even more so than Sano. And so all you're trying to do is kind of smooth out mechanically enough so that you can add just a little bit more contact so that the valleys are a little shorter and the peaks are a little higher or a little more consistently there. And, it's 3 games in, but it is kind of interesting that he started out by showing the downside, which is might not even put the ball in play a lot of games.
Right.
But he's shown the upside defensively.
Did get on base in Game 1
right.
Of a ground ball through the right side. But we should just mention, clearly people don't think that he is changing his approach, right? The teams are still playing him defensively, even with the limited shift.
Yeah, Kansas City brought in their right fielder
all the way into
basically deep second base and then shifted over there because you can shift with the outfielders still.
Yeah.
But his approach to the shift has always been and will continue to be, even with the limited shifts, I'm going to hit it over or through the shift.
Yeah. He'll tell you that straight out.
Right. I mean, he's not going to try to single the ball to third base and do this thing. So what I would caution with Gallo is the batting average is never going to be high. And if you're a fan out there who is obsessed with batting average and strikeouts, I would urge you to consider the fact that baseball has kind of moved past that. Now,
or get a snack when Gallo's on up.
Yeah, that too.
Don't subject yourself.
I would. It's fine to criticize a guy for hitting 200 or 190, and it's fine to criticize a guy who strikes out 200 and something times a year. But keep in mind, is he drawing walks? Is he still getting on base? Is he coming through with consistent power when he does have these big games? And is he changing games?
Is he an asset defensively?
And is he an asset defensively? Because that's to me the versatility and the ability to be a plus in the corner outfield spots. And now when he's needed as a fill-in first baseman, because who would be playing first base for them if they didn't have him? Right. So I would pay attention to. It's not even the little stuff. It's just not strikeouts and batting average.
Right.
Pay attention. He does plenty of other big stuff. Pay attention to that and at least balance that against the low batting average, which is going to be inevitable when you're trying to take a big picture view of what they're getting from Joey Gallo.
When we get back, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the rules changes, and in particular the pitch clock, which was a hot topic coming into the season, and I think is almost a hotter topic after watching one series of it amongst baseball fans. Let's dive into that and whether or not it has affected your enjoyment of baseball on Gleeman.
And the Fan.
We are big fans of BetterHelp because it's something that I think both of us have sort of dealt with. I've certainly dealt with therapy, and one of the things that stopped me from really pursuing therapy when I needed to pursue therapy was the logistics of the therapy.
The barriers for entry, right. I always say.
I mean, it's tough enough to convince yourself that you actually want to talk to something, to do something, and instead you're running around going, well, who do you like? And then you call people and they're, oh, well, we're booked.
There's just so many hoops you have to jump through. And some days you wake up and you think to yourself, today is the day I'm going to get help.
Right.
And you don't need any speed bumps blocking you from that. And that's the beauty of BetterHelp. You can use BetterHelp.com. You want to do a video chat with a licensed therapist? You can do that. If you don't want to be on camera, you can do a phone call or a Zoom, audio only. If you're like me and you just don't even want to do that, you can do a live chat where all you're doing is typing. They can tailor it to your needs. You can talk to a real licensed therapist.
Or maybe you're worried about the cost. It's also much more affordable to be dealing with this way. So, and you can discover your potential with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/Gleeman today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman.
Welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek. We're talking a little bit about the rules changes, and I think next hour sometime we're going to be doing a some sort of mailbag. On this.
That's a staple of our podcast. We like to do mailbag episodes. So
we like to tease people about a mailbag and then ignore the mailbag. Yeah. But if you want to be ignored or actually have a question answered, you can text us with at the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. That is 64686. So you just text 64686 your question. And I also wouldn't mind hearing what people think about the pitch clock, because I feel like anytime there's a change made to baseball.
Yes. Baseball more so than any other sport.
Right.
The one I always use as an example is like 5 years ago, they decided we're just going to have managers hold up 4 with their fingers instead of making a pitcher throw 4 intentional balls for an intentional walk.
Right.
And the number of newspaper columnists who freaked out about this, and then like literally 10 days later, everyone had forgotten because they realized how absurd that is.
Right.
Now, obviously, pitch clock is a bigger change, and the shift limitations are a bigger change, and even the bigger bases and the pickoff limitations and all the stuff they've instituted this year are a much bigger change. But for some reason, baseball, more so than like adding the 3-point line in the NBA or whatever it is, adding the forward pass to football.
Right.
I feel like there's more freakouts about stuff in baseball. It's almost the default reaction that many people have with baseball. And
something like pitch clock, which has been debated for years, maybe a decade, right? And there's been some battles about it between the Players Association, between the owners. It was something that was, do we need to get involved in the collective bargaining agreement? Like it was a legitimate point of contention for a while.
Let me say the experience that we just had right before the show.
Well, here, let me preface the experience that you just had. I was on the Common Man show last week with Brandon before Common was out with his surgery, and basically, we talked a little bit about pitch clock, and I assured Brandon that, and he actually agreed with me because he had gone to some Saints games last year where they tested it out,
right? At AAA.
That he was going to love the pitch clock and would barely notice it, and it was going to be great. Right. And he said to that effect, yeah, I know Common's already against it. Like Common is really opposed to the pitch clock.
So we walk in here at 2:58 or whatever it is. When the changeover happens, Common's finishing his show. We're coming in to start this show.
Common's sticking around to make sure we actually show up is what he was doing.
Well, I think that is true, yeah. Abbott told him, you might have to do 2 shows back to back if these doofuses don't show up. But we showed up. We come in on time. Sometimes we come in hot. Sometimes we're not always the most prepared, but we show up. And he says, we're just talking about whatever. And he goes, you know what? I got to tell you guys, I watched more baseball this weekend, all the Twins games. And he said he watched a couple of Cleveland-Seattle games too, late night. He said, I watched more baseball this weekend than I watch in an average season. He said, I love the pitch clock. Yeah, honestly.
It was, I effing love it.
Well, right. I wasn't going to. I'm a radio professional. I can't say that. And his point was what we've said to a lot of people, which is you think you're going to miss the half hour because the games have been a half hour shorter than the same time last year. You think you're going to miss that, and you think to yourself, well, the beauty of baseball is there's no clock, and the tension builds naturally and all that. And that's all true. And I've seen people go, well, maybe they should have the pitch clock in the regular season,
but not the timelessness of baseball.
Yeah. Right. But what you don't realize is it's only become so drawn out with the batter stepping out of the box and taking a little stroll and undoing his batting gloves, and the pitcher getting the ball back from the catcher and, walking in circles around the mound and bending down and using that has only become this extreme over the last 8 to 10 years. And I'm going to sound like Grandpa Gleeman here, which is fine. But go back and watch a game, not from the 60s, not from the 70s, but like the 90s or even the early 2000s. Right. And you will see that they're moving naturally at a pace that the pitch clock is now trying to force them back into.
Right.
The pitch clock was only needed because pitchers and hitters, and I do think it's relatively equal blame for this. I think the pitchers tend to get the most blame, but that's not been my experience. Stepping out of the box is every bit as damaging as just taking a long time to deliver a pitch.
Couldn't agree more.
The pitch clock, all it's doing is trying to remove...
By the way, we're seeing as many penalties called, maybe more penalties called on hitters than pitchers, right?
Well, the only one we saw in the Royals-Twins was on Franmil Reyes, the Royals designated hitter, but on opening day. But all they're trying to do now is eliminate the downtime or the dead air, the literal spots 15, 20, 30 seconds past when nothing is happening. That has really only come into existence over the past decade or so. They're trying to kind of get it back to the way it was. And for me, now we were both at spring training for weeks on end, and we saw it play out in spring training. We saw the good, the pace. We saw some of the tricky situations that popped up, which is why they wanted to institute it in spring training to get people familiar with it.
And why they want to have it run during the regular season for 6 months before we actually get to a postseason with it. Right. And why they implemented it in AAA last year before they even brought it to the major leagues.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and that's the other thing. It's been in the minors now for a year at AAA and 2 years in the low minors. So as prospects now start to come up to the majors, they're used to it. Right. It's only the veteran major leaguers who are really having to adjust. And so my first impressions, we can go through a lot of the rules changes one by one here, but the pitch clock has essentially taken 30 minutes of dead air out of the presentation of the same product. Right. It's the same amount of action. None of the action has been altered. It's just removed 30 minutes of basically filler. And from a pace perspective, now it leaves less time for checking your phone or going to get a beer, or in our case, tweeting. Right. That's fine. Those are things that have only become commonplace for baseball fans as sort of a coping mechanism for how long this thing is drawn out. And so I just think a 2.5 hour game, which is roughly what we've been seeing now the first weekend, is just so much better than a 3 hour and 10 minute game or a 3 hour game.
It's not shortening the game. It's just getting rid of so much fluff.
Yeah.
I guess fluff. And fluff's even too kind of a word for what it is getting rid of. Like it used to be, I'd be in the stands, and we get to the fifth inning, and there's a pitching change in the fifth inning, and the new guy gets into a little bit of trouble, runners on first and second, one out or something. And now suddenly it goes from 15 seconds a pitch to 45, 60, 90 seconds a pitch.
And everybody's calling time, and everybody's stepping out of the box.
Right. And granted, it's a tense moment, tense time. Like there is, to some extent, the lead is in the balance. It's the lead in the fifth inning. Okay? We can just also just play the game. Right. And not, and all of that stuff is missing. And what I was most surprised about the pitch clock, both when I saw it last year with the Saints and when I saw it again in spring training, and I would follow it up with the games that we've seen here so far, is how little I notice it. Yes. I don't notice it.
It just blends in.
I mean, people are noticing it because
the clock is there.
Announcers are focusing on it, and they're showing the clock as something like, hey, by the way, there's this thing going on right now, and you should all be aware of it because the players are being aware of it, and we're all getting used to it, and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is that when I was actually at a Saints game last year, and that wasn't going on, I just noticed that the game seemed to be moving pretty well, and it ended in a decent time.
Well, and here's the other thing that we saw this opening series, especially, but we saw this a lot during spring training in Fort Myers too, which is the majority of pitches are being delivered with 5 to 8 seconds left on the pitch clock. These are not buzzer-beating pitches.
Right.
These are not circumstances when the pitcher is going, oh, crap, I better throw.
Right.
For the most part, even guys who work relatively slow, which the Twins have quite a few of those pitchers, Sonny Gray is delivering pitches with 6, 7, 8 seconds left on the clock.
Which means there's at least 10 seconds between pitches.
Well, but also there's leeway. It's not actually altering. And as people get more comfortable with it, it's going to blend in even more. And pitchers are going to get their kind of natural timing mechanism so that they're not so afraid of a violation 2 months into the season because they've now worked with it for a while. I think now there's a fear of, let me get it and throw it, which is why you're seeing a lot of pitches with 6, 7, 8 seconds left. I think it's going to be closer to 2, 3 seconds left because there's going to be more of a rhythm established, and that actually might add a couple of minutes back to games. It won't be quite as fast paced, but I think just in general, the games are faster, the pace is better, there's less downtime. I think it's going to be something. And by the way, there were an average of 0.8 violations per game across Major League Baseball. Right. We only saw one in 3 games.
That's after 5 weeks of spring training.
Right. So imagine in June or July, let alone in October for the playoffs.
Right.
You're going to see very few violations in key spots. And here's what I would say to people who are worried that Game 7 of the World Series, tie game, extra innings, there's going to be some violation that decides it. By that point, everyone involved will have played under these rules for 7 or 8 months. Say to yourself, as it's happening, could this all have been avoided if someone from the dugout had just shouted, "Get in the box"?
Get in the box.
Right.
Throw the pitch.
That's all it is. And it's not really affecting that much unless you specifically go out of your way to step out of the box and Velcro your batting gloves. And I get that everyone's so used to that, so it's going to be a hard habit to break. But I'm overwhelmingly, I was in favor of the pitch clock before we saw it play out in spring training But now having seen it for 3 or 4 weeks in Fort Myers and now these first weekend in Major League Baseball, I'm overwhelmingly in favor of it.
They should have made the change 10 years ago, maybe 15
but they didn't need
years
it
ago.
15 years ago.
Well, yeah.
I mean, look,
You're
the,
right.
the time of game started to creep up in the early 2000s, but it really over the last 5 to 10 years has been crazy. Okay.
One of the things one final point on that, similar to the common man, all right, the people that end up enjoying this change are exactly the people who hate every other change to a baseball.
The old schoolers think they're going to hate it, but then they realize this is more approximating the baseball they grew up watching.
Right. I mean, Thomas Boswell of the Washington Post wrote a story last week basically saying, to some extent, I was ready to give up on baseball last year as the games were approaching 3.5 hours every night.
Right.
And now instead, this feels like I'm watching baseball in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And in fact, that's what the timing looks like. The timing looks like they're back to like pre-1983 baseball, which is just stunningly much more entertaining.
Okay, so a couple other things on some of the other rules that we've seen. The shift limitations, and I always call it it's not a shift ban. You're still going to see tons of shifts.
Right.
But you can only have 2 infielders on each side of second base. You have to have 2 infielders on each side of the literal second base bag. Splits the field in half. And
I think the bigger change is you can't have any of the infielders playing in the grass.
Right. So you can't play a guy in short right field.
I didn't think that was the bigger change earlier. I think that as I watch baseball now, to me, that is the bigger change of the two.
I mean, you could see it with the Twins' defense against the Royals, which is Carlos Correa made a great sprawling play on the first base side of second base and threw the guy out. And you think, well, wasn't he banned from doing that? Well, no, because he started the play 1 inch on the shortstop side of second base, and then the ball was hit, and you can still play right up the middle. When a line drive gets hit up the middle, you still should not be anticipating a guaranteed single in those spots.
Correct.
That just means the third baseman is going to have to cover a larger percentage of the left side, and it means that you can't put the shortstop where the second baseman is. You can only put the shortstop, in short center field. But yeah, I mean, I think limiting where you can stand to start the play so that you have to be on the dirt for a guy like Correa, especially, who isn't the fastest shortstop, but he's huge physically and he has an exceptional arm. So he wanted to play as deep as he could, believing that that expands his range. And if he can get to the ball, he has the arm strength to get it to first no matter where he is.
Right.
And so that shrinks his range a little bit. But I just, there were so many people who were
it does. It just shrinks his range a little bit. But it's a little bit. That's the difference. Right. And it's probably an adjustment for him too.
But there were so many people who looked at it and really had convinced themselves that shifts were no longer going to be in play. And I saw so many shifts watching games this weekend. They were just slightly extreme, not the most extreme shifts. And, there were people who were kind of dreaming on, Max Kepler with no shifts. It's just going to be amazing. All 100 ground balls that he hits to second base, those are all going to be hits.
Right.
Joey Gallo said, no. I mean, Max Kepler's 0 for 13. We see why. Max Kepler will be helped by fewer shifts.
Sure.
Just like all left-handed hitters will be helped by fewer shifts. But Max Kepler's problem wasn't the ground balls that he hit to second base. I mean, he hits too many of those. They're just the pop-ups to third base, the pop-ups to short right field. And we've seen that now over the first few games. The other change is they increased the size of the bases themselves to decrease the amount of distance that needs to be traveled on a stolen base.
Right.
To try to, and you look at it's not that, it's a couple inches on both sides.
Yeah, these are not, you from the stands, you can't tell that they are bigger bases. Right?
But think of all the bang plays on a steal of second that happen. And if you're decreasing the distance traveled by a foot or a half a foot even, some of those bang plays turned into safe steals. They also have limited the number of times that you can disengage or throw over if you're a pitcher. Once you do it twice, either if you just step off the mound or if you actually try to pick somebody off, once you've done that twice to the same base runner at the same base, doing it a third time, you can still do it a third time and you can pick them off. But if you don't pick them off,
it's like a balk.
Yes, it's like a balk. They go to second base. Right. So
is it just that runner though? It's just that runner, right? If there's runners on first and third, but they both don't.
I don't think the guy scores from third.
I don't think so. Yeah.
And so, looking at the early data, and again, it's skewed because it's cold weather. You're seeing the top of everyone's rotation, so it's going to be lower scoring than a normal sample size or whatever. But looking at the first, 50 games or whatever have been played at this point, almost twice as many stolen base attempts compared to last year at this time. And here's the big jump. generally the break-even point for steals is somewhere around 75%. Like where just for an average player in an average spot,
Right.
is it worth it to attempt it? You got to be about 3/4 of the time, you got to be safe to make it worthwhile.
Right.
And that's a sliding scale. If it's a really close game, that drops all that stuff.
Correct.
Generally, the league average rate is somewhere in the low 70s, 72%, 73%. It's like 85%
Right now.
so far this year on twice as many steals. Now, it's not exactly 1968 again, where everybody's running like crazy.
Right.
You're still getting, each team is averaging fewer than one stolen base. The Twins, by the way, haven't attempted a steal yet through 3 games. But
I was just going to say, this is not a good development for the Twins.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a good development for them offensively if everybody else has this weapon that they themselves don't really use and really can't use. Like this team is
Right.
not built. Michael Taylor might steal you a base occasionally.
I mean, you're going to see
Kepler.
guys like Kepler run a little bit more, Buxton occasionally maybe. But they did try to counteract that from a defensive standpoint by bringing in Christian Vasquez, who's one of the better throwing catchers in baseball.
They did, but they still have Jeffers on the team.
Right. So I think that is going to also lead to a more entertaining, action-filled product.
Yeah.
More steals. People like steals.
I agree.
And I think the pitch clock is going to decrease eventually, will decrease strikeout rate a little bit. So you have more balls put in play. And because of the shift limitations, more of the balls put in play are going to find holes to be singles. And what people really want when you ask them what has kind of pushed people away from baseball aesthetically, the pace of play, which is now fixed essentially. And then they want more action. And what they really mean by that often is more singles and more stolen bases. And I do think we're definitely seeing more stolen bases already because of the rules they put in. And I do think we're going to see more singles. Combination of pitchers having to work quicker will lead to fewer strikeouts, and then more balls in play will turn into more singles because of the shift. So I think, are the rules changes perfect? We need to see more. We need to see what the actual impact of some of this stuff is. But I think they're really made some drastic improvements immediately.
Yeah,
like we're
right.
barely into this thing, and
Yeah.
you could tell during spring training that are they fixing baseball so that some 16-year-old kid is going to be more likely to watch a baseball game than an NFL game all of a sudden? No. But they've greatly, to me, improved the product like almost immediately with no real changes that are going to like wreck the game itself. And so I think that should be commended. We should also point out, by the way, Kansas City hit 28 ground balls in 3 games, and the Twins turned 27 of them into an out. So you're limited with what you can do on shifts.
Yeah.
But you can still play the percentages and put people in position. And obviously, if
And that's without having a great infield defense. Just so we're clear.
Yeah,
Gallo,
Correa got a lot of those balls.
I mean, Correa's been fantastic. Miranda at third base,
he
solid.
missed, I would say he missed one play
Yeah,
that he
right.
made an error on.
Right.
Made basically 2 errors on one play. Bobbled it and then bobbled it again. But let's see. There was one other thing. I have one prediction on that. We saw it a little bit during the Kansas City series. There's limits to how often a batter or a pitcher can call time. But there's not limits to how many times you can tell the umpire, I need a second because the pitch comm device, which is in the helmet, the hat of a pitcher, is malfunctioning.
Right.
I think that's going to be we're going to see pitch comm malfunctions quadruple compared to last year because they're going to view it as a way to get time.
We also saw in spring training where, the catcher holds onto the ball a little bit because the pitch clock doesn't start until the pitcher
Right.
has the ball, right? So you're not seeing the umpire throw the ball to the pitcher as much. Instead, nope, I'm going to give it to the catcher, and the catcher might hang on to it for a second, 2, 3, give the catcher, wait until he gets back on the mound, doesn't want to throw it to him when he's still halfway, 5, 6 feet off the mound.
Yeah.
Because you want to be careful at that time.
You're incentivized to be very deliberate in your actions
Right.
when clocks start at certain points.
Right.
And I think we're going to see that too. So, I don't know. When we mentioned Max Kepler in the leadoff spot. I would say that is a good, we'll come back. He's back in the leadoff spot tonight.
I should mention that I did get a text from Matthew Trueblood, who's our baseball expert. All runners advance if you end up doing the third one there, not just the one you throw to. So when we get back, let's talk about the leadoff spot because there's a
Max, if you're listening to this would be the time to change stations or just put some earmuffs on or whatever it is.
Well, he's going to have to go watch Luis Ariz and get compared to him for the whole series.
Okay. Sorry.
All right, we get back. Let's talk about Luis Ariz and Max Kepler and leading off.
The Fan.
Bryant, KFAN text line.
Bradshaw and Bryant.
I'm sorry, what did I say? Bradley, Bradshaw, and Bryant, KFAN text line. 64686 if you've got some questions. We got a question on Mr. Max Kepler. Poor Max. Max has a slow start to the season. People are questioning why he should be leadoff hitter.
I mean, let's put it in context here. I've had a slow start 40 years to my life. Max Kepler is a guy who makes $10 million a year. He's incredibly good looking. He's in great shape. He's well liked by all his teammates. Yeah, the guy has a low batting average, and he hasn't really produced for a couple years. But, the woe is me. Let me put it this way. If you said to him, Max, would you like to swap lives with John Bonus? Now, keep in mind, you get to co-host fill in for Dan Barrero twice in the same week.
That's fair.
Yeah. Could you be a better leadoff hitter? That's the question. I know you have the speed that everyone looks for in the leadoff spot.
Versus left-handers, maybe.
Wait, so what? Okay, there were a lot of, we just picked one of many questions about Max Kepler.
Yeah, the one that says, is Kepler on the hot seat, or does the Kirilloff injury, which forces Gallo to first, keep him off of the hot seat?
Right. So I thought they were going to trade Max Kepler this offseason.
Yes. We all thought they were going to trade Max Kepler.
Particularly once they signed Gallo,
right,
and added him to what was already a plentiful left-handed hitting corner outfield first base DH mix. But then they traded Luis Ariz for Pablo Lopez.
Yep.
And that kind of reopened the door for Kepler to be their primary right fielder. I also think they were openly willing to trade Kepler. And I talked to a Twins official or two who said there was interest in him. But for whatever reason, they didn't like the offers that they were getting. I'm going to guess the offers weren't particularly amazing, but who knows?
It always felt to me like what they were searching for was something that was going to help their team this year.
A reliever or something like that.
And what the offers that they were getting is the offers that you're much more likely to get during the offseason.
Some
which is
random low A reliever.
A double A prospect or something like that you like a little bit more than the team that has him likes.
Right. Know? And, Kepler's tied for the longest tenured Twin with Polanco at this point.
Yeah.
He's a very good right fielder defensively.
He's been in the organization since he was 16, right?
Right.
Yeah, right.
12 years or something like that. They had some hope that the shift stuff that we just talked about could benefit him a little bit. They also thought he's been banged up the last year or two, so maybe healthier. But, I don't think they were under the impression that Kepler was going to return to the 2019 version that we saw where he was an all-star caliber player, hitting 30 home runs, batting 250.
Not unless the ball returns to the 2019 juiced baseball.
But he is an interesting guy. We talked so much about strikeouts with Gallo and Sano earlier, and people hate strikeouts and hate low batting average. But it's funny that Max Kepler has a lower career batting average than Miguel Sano, but does not get, or at least used to not get, the same type of criticism for his low batting average because Max Kepler doesn't strike out much.
Right.
And that kind of blows people's minds when you see a 220 or 215 batting average from a guy who actually puts the ball in play a fair amount. But as we talked about, and that's why people assumed Kepler would be really helped by the shift, and he may still benefit from it. But Kepler, the quality of the balls that Kepler puts in play has always been among the lowest in all of baseball. Because when he's not hitting home runs, he grounds out to second, he pops up to third base or shallow to the outfield.
There's a lot of warning track fly balls.
Right. He hits so many balls that are 99% outs. And so the value of putting the ball in play is not that much higher a lot of the time than just striking out. And so aesthetically, people look at Sano going 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts and they go, what a bum, that was a terrible game. Whereas they might look at Max Kepler going 0 for 4 with no strikeouts and say, well, at least he put the ball in play. And if this, another foot here, another foot there, they made a great play to turn it into an out, all that. There's always this room for optimism when you're putting the ball in play.
Right.
Now, why is he batting leadoff, which is the question that we've got?
He also brings some other things to the table. He's a really good defensive right fielder. That's not
I said that right.
Good base runner.
You should listen to the show. But why is he hitting leadoff? Here's why he's hitting leadoff. They don't have another big leadoff hitter.
Right. I mean, no matter who they put in leadoff versus a right-handed pitcher, your question is going to be, why is he hitting leadoff?
Right. I mean, Gallo is the guy they toyed with and used at the leadoff spot throughout spring training, and people's brains would have blown up if a 199 career hitter was batting leadoff.
Right.
The highest strikeout rate in baseball history is batting leadoff. You may still see some of that. Right. Now,
Nick Gordon
could have batted leadoff, but Nick Gordon has been a quality major league hitter for exactly one half of one season.
Right.
And I'm a Nick Gordon believer. I think he's legit.
By the way, he also doesn't have a hit this year.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, he's over 8 or whatever.
Right.
I think against right-handed pitchers, they want to use a lefty in the leadoff spot because they know that they're going to have Correa second, likely Buxton third, and they also know that Miranda is either going to be batting fourth or fifth.
Right.
Now, they've used Larnach in the cleanup spot, and he's actually looked good so far. But even that is coming out of spring training, the idea of Larnach, who's not exactly been an established quality major leaguer because of some injuries, as your cleanup guy, drew a lot of looks.
That might be my biggest positive surprise so far from what we have seen. A, that they are trusting Larnach with the cleanup spot, and B, that it's working.
Well, but here's the thing. First of all, it's only 3 games. But with Larnach, the key has always been he takes good at bats. He can drive the ball to all fields. I definitely think he has the 265 batting average with 25 homers and a lot of walks profile as a hitter, and he's shown that for long stretches until he's gotten injured in the middle of both of his seasons.
Correct.
And he's tried to play through the injuries, and his performance has been so abysmal for the month or so he tries to play through an injury that it drags his overall numbers down to nothingness. And then you look at him at the end of the season and you go, well, he had like a 660 OPS. That's terrible.
Right.
But it was really an 850 OPS followed by a 400 OPS.
Right.
And so, yes, if he can stay healthy, this is the guy we saw in Kansas City is much closer to the type of hitter that he can be than what his overall numbers suggest. But you're not going to bat Larnach in the leadoff spot because you need him in the middle. Now, if Gallo starts hitting really well, Gallo can be a middle of the lineup type of guy. But this is where they miss Arise, obviously, who was an ideal leadoff man because he had a great on-base percentage. But that's how you got Pablo Lopez, who's looked pretty good so far. And this is also where I believe you miss Polanco. Because Polanco, as a switch hitter with some speed, the ability to put the ball in play, gap power, and just a good at-bat, would have been an ideal leadoff solution for this type of lineup that is now all of a sudden very right-handed heavy because he's a switch hitter. So I also think they have some prospects. Edward Julian, who's an on-base machine, who's now at AAA. Royce Lewis, if healthy, profiles as a potential leadoff guy. Austin Martin, same thing. Honestly, even
Austin
Brooks,
Martin, I was very excited about being a leadoff guy.
Yeah.
Now
he's hurt. He has an elbow injury. And Brooks Lee, their number one prospect, could potentially, at least early in his career, be the leadoff type of switch hitter. But all those guys are in the minors right now.
Right.
And Alex Kirilloff's hurt and Polanco's hurt, and they're trying to get a sense of where Gallo is at compared to last year. And so what you end up with...
based on what we've seen from him so far, you see why you don't necessarily want him leading off. Right.
So what you end up with is Max Kepler. They're turning back the clock to 2019, which was one of the first things Baldelli did when he took over as manager. He said, Kepler's going to be the leadoff man, and I know that's going to rub people wrong, but I think he's got it in him. And he went and had a breakout year. He was okay in the leadoff spot in 2020, but then his production really started to decline, at which point they swapped him out for the most part with a rise. Now, you could do some other things. You could put Buxton in the leadoff spot, have Correa still bat second, put Larnach third instead of fourth, and just have Miranda bat fourth.
Yep.
But then all you're doing is putting Kepler either fifth, sixth, seventh, which is still a key spot. I mean,
but it's not as key as first.
Correct. And
that's where
it's not as headline grabbing.
That's kind of where I'm going.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think
basically you're moving everybody up one, and then sliding Kepler in someplace.
Right.
Right.
Their best hitters are right-handed hitters. I mean, their 3 best hitters right now, most likely, are in some order Correa, Buxton, and Miranda. Now, Larnach has the potential. Gallo has the potential. Polanco, if healthy, has the potential to be one of those guys. But right now, as we
Julian
say,
has the potential.
Well, right, but he's hitting 140 for the Saints right now. But I don't think their plan is to have Kepler be the leadoff man for the bulk of this season. I think they would like Polanco in that role. They would like Julian in that role. They would like Royce Lewis in that role. I actually think if Gallo would have had a better spring, Gallo might have been in that role, in which case people would be
freaking out about that.
Sending texts about how can you have a 198. Right. So there isn't an ideal fit, which obviously magnifies the decision to trade Luis Arise.
Nick Gordon is the key, the X factor here, right? I mean, if Nick Gordon ends up coming through and hitting like we think he can hit right-handers, becomes that player, he looks like an interesting leadoff option, right?
The way he hit in the second half of last year is more like a number 5 hitter than a number 1 hitter.
I mean, yeah, it's true.
He doesn't draw a lot of walks, but he's got speed.
He's certainly aggressive at the plate.
Right.
He's not patient at the plate, right?
So I think
but he can do things on the base paths.
They're kind of trying to, and look, I'm, as you may have been able to tell over these last 10 minutes, I'm not a believer in Max Kepler at this point. 2 years ago, I looked at his performance and some of the underlying metrics, and I wrote a big, long thing about it. At the time, it was more controversial because he hadn't had 2 or 3 struggle years at that point. I just believe he's generally not overrated, but people perceive him as being closer to a bounce back than he actually is, because they look at a low strikeout guy who's a good athlete and is capable of putting a really good swing on the ball, and they go, it has to click for him. But we're 7 years in, and he has the lowest batting average on balls in play in the history of Major League Baseball, I think, for a left-handed hitter. It's not going to click for him. But he still draws some walks. You know, he obviously going over 13 is going to make anybody look bad. He's going to rebound from that to some extent. But, you know, if you're saying to yourself, why do the Twins have Max Kepler in the leadoff spot? It's not because they arrived at spring training and Rocco Baldelli said, I got to find a way to get Max Kepler back in the leadoff spot.
Right.
It's because they looked around and they said,
somebody has to bat first.
Somebody's got to bat first.
Right.
And
Right.
for now, at least, it's going to be Max Kepler. If he doesn't produce, is that still the case next month? Probably not. And even if he does produce reasonably okay by his standards, I do think by midseason, they would love for Ed Julian or a healthy Royce Lewis or a healthy Austin Martin or Jorge Polanco, if he's able to come back from his knee problem, batting atop the lineup. And I think if you can get that situation worked out with somebody, a legitimate left-handed or switch hitter at the top of that lineup, going then into Correa, Buxton, Larnach, maybe Kirilloff at some point, and Miranda, and maybe Gallo, you really could have something.
Yeah, I mean, that is the hope for this offense. If there's a concern right now, I think we entered the season, we talked about it. My biggest concern was the lineup. Yeah. Right. It's still 3 games into it, is still my biggest concern from what I've seen. Not 3 games, but, but it'll be interesting. But they do have a lot of depth that they can draw. They've got a lot of options in the minor leagues that they can come from. And they've got some guys that are healthy, that are unhealthy, that they're hoping they can come back and take care of that. When we get back, I want to talk just real briefly on the Twins' second biggest move of the offseason, which we basically have ignored and not talked about at all, and that has to do with their catching situation. We'll talk about that in Gleeman and the Geek when we get back.
One more thing before we leave. The Fan and BigTech.com want to give you a shot at $1,000 in your hand at the National Cash Contest. Head to KFA.com and the keyword bank. That is bank for your shot at $1,000. KFAN.com. Fan.
And welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek. We talked a little bit before we left about it was a crazy offseason dominated by the Correa return, an unforeseen turn of events, several unforeseen turn of events that led to Twins somehow ending up with one of the premier free agents on the market.
It was dominated by 2 exits and a return by Carlos Correa.
Right. Really 3, kind of.
Well, right.
Right. But, at the beginning of the offseason, one of the things they did is they signed the second best free catcher on the free agent market, Christian Vasquez, who, can hit a little bit, but also is known specifically for his defense, both his framing and his ability to throw out runners, which is something that the Twins struggled with.
And just has this is not, quantifiable as easily, but just has a very good rep as sort of a handler of pitchers.
Correct.
Beyond framing, calling pitches.
That's a really good point.
He was the Red Sox catcher for a long time. He was a starting catcher on their World Series team in 5 years ago or so. Right. He also won a World Series with the Astros this past October, although he was kind of a part-timer with the Astros.
He was the backup.
3 years, $30 million for him. Like you said, other than Wilson Contreras, who got 2.5 times that much from the Cardinals, I viewed him as the premier catcher on the market. They made that move pretty early in the offseason, certainly at a point where it was safe for them to assume they weren't going to have Correa back.
Right.
And so they were at a point where they were like, we need to move forward as much as we can here and check some of the boxes that we really feel like we need to check. We talked earlier about how a lot of that was surrounding depth.
Yep.
They traded for Kyle Farmer right away as kind of a placeholder shortstop if Correa didn't come back. Catcher was a spot that, we
kind of wondered if they would get a backup and have Jeffers be the starter, right? We were looking at, they went through the second half of last year with Sandy Leon, who's, journeyman, low 30-some-year-old, left-handed.
Sandy Leon, great defender, very well liked, could never hit.
Right.
And there were times last year, he actually ended up having knee surgery after the season, but I remember I talked to him about something in the clubhouse after a game one time, And I've never seen a human with more ice on a body part than he had on his knees, and he had them on both knees.
Right.
And so,
right, of course.
They obviously Gary Sanchez ended up catching a lot more games than
Right.
they anticipated. Gary
Yes.
Sanchez just signed a minor league deal with the Giants, by the way.
Wow.
But
How many Twins from last year are not on a
Archer,
team
Bundy,
anywhere?
Sanchez, it doesn't speak that
Leon
well.
ended up re-signing with the Rangers, right?
Yeah,
You
minor
know
league
that
deal.
minor league deal.
But to your point, the question that they basically had was,
So no.
Sano's still looking for work. Astudillo went to, although he
Japan?
wasn't on the team last year, went to
I
Japan.
guess.
The question that they faced was basically, do we still believe that Ryan Jeffers can be a primary number one catcher, 90 or 100 games a year? And if so, who's the best kind of part-time or backup to pair with him? Or what they ended up doing is you bring in a clear-cut number one starter who's been starting for playoff teams for the last 8 or 10 years in Vasquez. He becomes the 80, 90, 100 start per year guy, hopefully. Great defense, like we said, that comes into play with the stolen bases going up this year. And it pushes Jeffers into a backup role, although I don't really anticipate them using him as a traditional backup, because a traditional backup catcher to me is someone who basically starts once or twice a week, almost kind of at random.
Right.
Like, okay, the main guy's caught 3 in a row, you catch the 4th one. The main guy's caught 4 out of 5, you catch the 6th one, whatever. I think they're going to, and that's what Vasquez started the first 2, so it was natural to have Jeffers start the 3rd game in Kansas City, but
Sure.
it's Vasquez now back behind the plate. Now, I do think they're going to try to find spots to use Jeffers and start Jeffers, whether it's once or twice a week, 2 or 3 times a week, mostly against left-handed pitchers, because that's really the one skill he's shown consistently as a hitter is the ability to hit and hit for power against lefties. But he's been so unreliable and ultimately very bad against right-handed pitchers, which is the bulk of the pitchers that you're going to see, that even a fellow right-handed hitter like Vasquez, who's just sort of neutral in terms of platoon splits, is a much better choice, particularly when you factor in the defense.
Right.
So I think you're going to see Vasquez start the bulk of the games in general, but especially against righties. And then they may kind of split 50-50 the games against lefties. And if you add all that up in the big picture, what that probably equals is somewhere around 100 starts for Vasquez and somewhere around 60 starts for Jeffers, although obviously with the catcher spot, especially injuries can come into play.
I wondered if versus left-handed pitchers, this is before Buxton ended up taking over a full-time DH spot, if we would see Jeffers in the DH spot a lot.
Just against lefties, before people freak out about that.
Yeah, I would see him in the DH spot versus left-handed pitching. You can still have Vasquez and his defense behind the plate. He's still in the lineup. Also, right-handed hitter versus lefties. One of the things we haven't really talked about, maybe we'll talk about later in the show, I don't want to dive into it right now, it's too big a topic, but is just how miserable the Twins have been versus left-handed pitchers up to this point. It was nice to see Jeffers, after not getting off the bench the first 2 games. I'm sure he was smarting a little bit of not starting game 2, right? To get out there and not only get some important hits, but the way he got those important hits, which are just making contact with the ball, not really. He has been sort of I'm going to swing for the fences kind of guy, and instead, a little opposite field flare and another one, right?
Yeah, the one was.
Yeah,
let's not give him too much credit. He put the ball in play.
Right.
The first one. The second one was just a solid single.
That's right.
But yeah, he's also similar to what they're trying to do with Gallo. David Popkins has kind of widened his base a little bit more too. They've also gotten rid of the big leg kick at the beginning, which works for many players. But for him, they're trying to kind of smooth out his mechanics and make less pre-swing movement in the hopes that he can make more consistent contact.
Right.
And he does have power. And so it's a situation where you're going to not just put the ball in play just to put the ball in play. But we've seen now twice with 2 outs in a spot where just putting the ball in play, just hitting a single, just hitting it where they pitch you, has huge value as opposed to trying to swing for the fences. And that could be huge for him. But yeah, I don't think people quite realize how awful the average backup catcher is.
Right.
And so
he's a good backup
catcher.
He's a
really good backup
right,
catcher.
Exactly.
And
right.
Specifically, a guy you can spot against lefties, and he can be an asset. He could potentially pinch hit against lefties and be an asset. I would encourage people to look up his career numbers against lefties. They're quite good.
262 batting average.
Yeah.
790 OPS against lefties for his career. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's a very solid. Yeah, really
not middle of the lineup, but 5th, 6th, 7th type of hitter. Right. But I would anticipate what we've seen so far, which is a lot of Vasquez. I think they're going to find spots to use Jeffers against lefties B, use Jeffers just when they've had 6 games in a row and Vasquez is just worn out. And C, pair him like he was paired with Joe Ryan. Pair him specifically with pitchers like Joe Ryan, or if Bailey Ober's back in the majors, young pitchers that he's worked with in the minors or in the majors with the Twins thus far and are fastball dependent so that there's not as much blocking involved.
Right.
There's not as much stolen base limiting needed.
Yeah,
and
fair.
I think those are the spots where you can kind of minimize his weaknesses and maximize his strengths. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of Christian Vasquez. This is not a timeshare. This is a number 1 and number 2 catcher.
When we get back, what do you want to talk about? We've got a little
We got
longer
some
segment.
mailbag questions that people have
that's right.
sent
Yeah,
in.
that's right. We'll if you've got some questions, shoot them to the Brad, Shaw, and Bryant KFAN text line. It's 64686. 64686 for the Brad, Shaw, and Bryant KFAN text line. We'll cover some of those and some other topics, twin topics, when we get back.
On the Fan.
Welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek. We have been getting questions in on the Brad, Shaw, and Bryant KFAN text line at 64686. If you've got some, feel free to send them in. 2 questions about returning injured players.
Okay.
And I think both of them kind of lead into a third topic. The first one is, do you guys expect Royce Lewis to return and or be an asset to the season? The second is, how long until Polanco returns? And how does his return change the batting order and defensive lineup? In both cases, I think it's worth kind of taking a look, a level down below the Twins at what is going on with the St. Paul Saints. Because the St. Paul Saints, who unfortunately have already canceled their home opener tomorrow because it's going to be hell on earth here in Minnesota, as is often the case.
Hell on earth? Isn't hell hot? Hell's hot.
Well,
Yeah.
snowballs chance, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
They have got a loaded roster this year, and they've got it loaded with a lot of prospects. And turns out, I mean, that's going to be fun to watch if you make your way over to CHS Field, which I plan to do because I enjoy CHS Field a great deal.
And because you're banned from Target Field.
No, not yet.
Oh.
No, I mean, I've got some good disguises and such.
You're not allowed to sit by me in the press box.
That's right, yeah.
We put John
I'm
Way in
close
the
to
back.
banned from the press box, but I'm not even banned from there.
There's wanted signs in the press box with your
Fingers
wanted
crossed.
John Bonus.
That would be it.
That's right.
I should print those out. Oh, I really want to print those out. Maybe
They would be in the gray deck if they're going to be anywhere. They're going to try
they
and find
love
me.
you.
That's where the sting operation is happening.
half the profit of the Great Duck Deck is just John Bonus.
We could talk a little bit about that taste of the Twins, by the way, if we're going to talk about all the different places there at Target
I
Field.
am truly amazed that we were not stressing, but the notion of filling 3.5 hours of live radio is somewhat difficult. And I did nothing today. Now that's not unique for me. I often do nothing all day. But John went to the Taste of the Twins, which is where they invite all the media members and stuff to try the new food. And if I were to have done that, I would need such a food coma nap afterward. And instead, John,
I got a 15-minute food coma.
no, I'm
nap. I
talking
did.
days, like a week long. So for John to eat, 8,000 calories of fried foods and whatever,
Yeah.
and then just nap for 12 minutes and then come to the radio set, I give him credit.
I'm built different, Gleeman.
You are built different.
There's no question
And
about that.
Part of me is like, if I were built a little bit more like John, a little hardier, a little more willing to do multiple things in a day, it might be better. And then I stop myself and I think, are you really saying more people should be built like John Bonus? I think we can agree, although this is radio, it's theater of the mind. You guys are luckily are not seeing us. Neither of us.
Good luck being built as John Bonus.
Yes. We're both wearing tuxedos, by the way, since nobody can see us. We got really dressed
The
up.
foods that you want to consider this year, the fried chicken that's going to be in center field is really good,
Okay.
which is a nice thing. And then near the Gray Duck Deck, there's a stand now for the Union Mung Kitchen, which has like a noodle salad or something with a spicy, specially made, I think, Mung spiced Kremarczyk sausage that they contracted from Kremarczyk sausage. Also outstanding. Those are my top 2 recommendations.
Those are your picks to click.
Those are my picks to click for this
But
2023
they still,
season.
my favorite is the Tonio Cuban sandwich. They still have that.
I think they still have that. I know they still have the Hot Indian,
Which is your favorite.
Tikka bowl, which is my favorite.
They still have the Luce out in center field, Pizza Luce.
I did not make it. They did not have the third deck open, so I don't know. I presume they still have Pizza Luce sitting up there at Minnie and Paul's. area up
Yeah.
there. Checked out the new scoreboard. Also, they've got a kind of interesting thing along the right field, outfield line now, foul line. They've got a LED display that is in the concourse as you look out at the field. So you can kind of see the score and such that's going on. That's pretty cool. That I liked as well. So anyway, lots of good stuff to happen at Target Field.
Okay, getting back to these two questions,
but
however.
also there's stuff good happening at CHS Field. Right. Which
so
is,
Polanco, let's talk Polanco first, which is he's 8 months removed from the initial knee problems of last year, which was a bone bruise and then tendonitis.
right.
And his last game last year was August, I believe, 28th. And he didn't have surgery or anything. And so clearly the hope was by the time spring training rolled around, maybe they ramp him up slowly like they did with Buxton, but that he would be ready to go.
Right.
And early in spring training, I had a Twins official say to me off the record, I would expect Polanco to appear in a game before Buxton and before Kirilloff.
Right.
And then a couple weeks later, Polanco it wasn't a setback, but he was still having soreness. He had to have fluid drained from his knee. It was clear he just was not progressing to the point that they wanted. And, 10 or so days out from opening day, they said, well, he's just going to begin the season on the injured list along with Kirilloff. And it was Buxton, the one that's ready. Now, as a DH, it's a little different than playing center field. But there hasn't been kind of a firm timeline on Polanco because it's not a new injury and there's no surgery that he's coming back from. It's just basically pain tolerance and can they get the fluid out of his knee and the swelling down? And, can he participate in drills and show up the next day without his knee wrapped and be able to walk around? And so far, that hasn't happened. Now, at the end of spring training, they were relatively optimistic, they being the Twins, that it was going to be weeks missed as opposed to months missed.
Right.
But
I think we've heard that back in August.
I mean, my thing is...
We certainly heard it at the end in September.
Right. The idea that you can have a knee problem that is not surgical in August and have it now be April and the timeline to return is just sort of up in the air is clearly worrisome. Right. You toss in the fact that Polanco has had multiple ankle surgeries in the past and, he's 29, I think, but his legs are about 50 at this point. And I do think it's worrisome. They're going, like we talked about earlier, Gordon and Farmer are subbing for him now.
Right. And that's a fine solution for now. The problem is that it also eats up your bench.
Right.
And so at some point the question becomes, can we, can he come back? We've already talked about the impact he could have the lineup, especially right at the top of the lineup if he does come back.
I generally think when healthy, Jorge Polanco might be the most underrated core player for the Twins over the last 6 or 7 years.
I think you're right.
He was the team MVP 2 years ago. He was an all-star 4 years ago. He's a switch hitter who, especially since moving to second, is a good defender. He has power. He draws walks. He's got speed. I think people tend to underrate him relative to Buxton or even like Nelson Cruz and all that stuff. I mean, he is most years one of their 5 best all-around players.
I would say 4, maybe 3. And, that's option A, I want him back. Right. Option C, I'm kind of dealing with right now, which is I've got Farmer and Gordon kind of platooning there. And I would like to have those guys on the bench and available for other things. Or if we have different injuries that could happen, I'd like to have them available. But option B is sitting down there in St. Paul right now. And, right now, I don't know that he's necessarily option B, otherwise he'd be up here. But he's not up here because he spent most of the year, the entire year last year in Double-A, and that's Edouard Julien, who ended up, having a tremendous year in Double-A Wichita, then a tremendous year in...
Max Kepler heard us talking, by the way, and it's just hit a leadoff home run. That's all it took.
That's right.
I should tell you that Rocco Baldelli said, can you please go on live on Barrero's show and talk a little smack about Kepler?
That's right.
And I said he was listening.
Yeah, you're right.
Clearly listening in the clubhouse before the game went out and ripped a Johnny Cueto pitch into right center for a solo homer. Yes, but Edouard Julien is a second baseman primarily. But
he's being played at second base.
Right. It's similar to somewhere he's closer to
he's a second baseman the way Polanco was a shortstop. How about that?
Right. I mean, Gordon is playing second base now, but is not a great second baseman. Luis Arraez, part of the reason they felt he was tradable is they ceased viewing him as a quality second baseman and started viewing him as a first baseman DH. I think eventually Julien, if he finds a long-term home in the Twins lineup, which I think he will, it will probably be as a first baseman, DH, and occasional second baseman, kind of like a rise at the end.
Corner outfielder?
Maybe corner outfielder, too.
They've got a few left-handed hitting corner outfielders right now.
But yeah, I mean, if they thought he was legit defensively, I think that would have opened up more of a possibility that he would step in for Polanco. I still think they would have gone with Gordon Farmer because, like I said, they're hoping Polanco is back certainly by May.
Right.
In which case, do you want to interrupt the development of a prospect who spent last season at AA and rush him to the majors if when Polanco comes back and let's say Julian has not been great, he's just been kind of mediocre,
right.
Then you're sending him back to AAA before he had really even played at AAA, and it can complicate some things. But if either I like that we're now doing ABC, we're both taking the same approach here. If either Polanco is out for much longer than they're hoping, which has already sort of been the case. But I mean,
right.
if it's June 1st and he's still out of the lineup,
right.
or B, neither Gordon nor Farmer is really producing how you would want them to produce, playing in a platoon in that role. And Ed Julian, even if he's down at AAA hitting 265 with a bunch of walks, and he's shown a little bit of improvement defensively at second base, it's not a work ethic thing or a reps thing with him. He's just limited.
Right.
He's had Tommy John surgery, so he doesn't have the greatest arm. He's played a lot of first base and corner outfield in college and the minors, so he's not kind of a natural at second base, but he's made some strides there. He's just never going to be.
I mean, Rocco has said second base is the kind of thing where, repetition and
right.
work and putting in the time
especially,
and learning the skills is something that you can eventually feel pretty well at second
especially
base.
Turn into a lot of that is just getting comfortable, smooth with it.
But I mean, the thing with...
So if it's May or June,
right.
and Polanco's still out and Julian is healthy and playing well at AAA, then I think fans should be clamoring for him. But I think at this point, it makes sense to see where Polanco's at over the next several weeks, see what kind of production you can get from Gordon and Farmer, which I do think that duo is capable of being very productive if deployed in the right matchups. And by the way, the other question was about Royce Lewis.
Well, before that, let me do Julian. I would also suggest that if Julian does tear it up in AAA, similar to what we saw either in the Arizona Fall League or in the World Baseball Classic.
Yeah, he was great for Canada.
Or in AA last year.
Right.
That regardless of Polanco's status, he could probably find someplace in this lineup.
I mean, think it'll be DH first base type of thing.
It might be. Right. It might very well be. Maybe you move Gallo back out to left field and you end up having him at first base.
Julian has the potential.
Buxton's playing center field. You have him at DH, right?
Julian has the potential to be a really special hitter. I mean, there's some strikeout issue and some low batting average potential, although he hit 300 at AA last year. But he has led all of minor league baseball in on-base percentage the past 2 years. And he's not just an Arise type who's singles and walks.
Right.
He has 20 homer or more power as a left-handed bat. And he's pretty fast. He can steal 10, 15 bases. He's a good athlete. He's got defensive flexibility, although he's not great at any one position.
When we talked about the leadoff spot, he would also be somebody that might slide into that leadoff spot, especially versus right-handed
pitching. If he
pitching.
develops into the type of player that he appears to be right now in the minors, he would be, he might be an ideal number 2, number 3 hitter, but he would be
hit leadoff for Canada, right? Yeah,
he would be an ideal high walk, high on base percentage, left-handed bat at the top of the lineup. Now, there was the other question about Royce Lewis, who's coming back from his second torn ACL in as many seasons. He's healthy enough to be participating in much of spring training, just not game action. He's going to be in extended spring training, kind of finishing his rehab over the next month or two. The hope with him is sometime around midseason, June, July, he can be cleared for game action. Now, the question there becomes, does he just do a brief rehab assignment and then rejoin the Twins? Because he was with the Twins when he got hurt last year. Or do they treat him, once healthy, as more of a traditional prospect and say, okay, we're assigning you to AAA, where, similar to Julian, let's say, you need to stay healthy, you need to perform. He's going to have to play other positions beyond shortstop. Although he started to do that last year before the injury.
I mean, he didn't really have much time at AAA last year.
No, he played 35 games.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean,
he was really good.
Right. He was really good. He was good enough, and the Twins were banged up enough that they ended up calling him up, pretty early in his career.
And, Julian is closer to the majors because he's at AAA and he's healthy. But once healthy, Lewis will either be at AAA or with the Twins. And realistically, he's not going to be a long-term shortstop for the Twins. A, because Correa is there.
Right.
And B, because he's coming off back-to-back knee surgeries. We don't know where he's at from an athleticism standpoint.
Right.
But I think from a skill set standpoint, assuming he comes most of the way back, at least from where he was pre-surgeries. Third base, second base, or any of the outfield
another
spots.
Another option for Polanco.
He could potentially
come back. Right?
I'm of the belief, talking to some Twins folks in spring training about this type of thing, long term, they would love their infield to be Correa at shortstop, Brooks Lee at third, Royce Lewis at second, and Miranda at first, and maybe Ed Julian at first or DH along with Miranda. That is going to involve some health. That's going to involve some further development for guys, but that has a chance to be really good offensively and defensively with some switch hitters, some left-handed bats involved.
And pretty cheap outside of the shortstop.
Pretty cheap
position.
other than the shortstop for a while, too, which is a key consideration. So,
right.
You mentioned AAA. Julian is a guy to watch. Matt Wallner is a reigning minor league player of the year.
Imagine how many different places he could fit in on this. We've talked about Kepler struggling. We've talked about Gallo struggling. We've got Larnach biting off a fair amount, more than he can chew. Maybe not more than he can chew. He's been doing well in the cleanup spot and so on, but putting a lot on his plate. Well, I mean, Wallner fits in for any of those, as does Alex Kirilloff, who's also on the injured list and probably will spend some time. My guess is he spends some time with the Saints as well. I mean, so there you've got you've got two bats down there that look, like they're pretty close. Well, I mean, we don't know exactly what Kirilloff's situation is, right? But
close.
Well,
sorry,
I'm not saying that he's necessarily close to healthy. I'm saying it feels like he's close to productive. You're incorrect.
I'm shaking my head on radio, which is always a great thing to do. But yeah, Wallner I would describe as kind of a mix between Larnach and Gallo as a left-handed bat.
Yeah, that feels about right.
He's got good plate discipline. Yeah. He's got a great arm. He's not a great outfielder, but he's got a great arm.
Right.
He's got 30-plus homer power. He draws walks, high strikeout rate, low batting average. He's a guy who, if they had traded Kepler, I could absolutely see him in the opening day lineup too. They also have Austin Martin, whose status is uncertain because of an elbow injury that he had during camp. And then from a pitching side, Bailey Ober's there.
We should mention who they got Austin Martin from. They got Austin Martin in the trade that they sent Jose Barrios away. He was one of the top picks in the draft that year. He had a pretty crummy year, to be honest, with last year, but seemed to have bounced back in the Arizona Fall League and then showed up this year and has a bad elbow in spring training. So
those are some of the bats to watch at AAA. They also have guys like Kyle Garlick, who have been productive major leaguers who are now there. But from a pitching side, they have the back-to-back Twins minor league pitcher of the year, Louis Varland, Minnesota native.
Right.
Wallner is also a Minnesota native. They have Simeon Woods Richardson, who was acquired along with Martin in the Barrios trade that you just mentioned from Toronto a couple of years ago. They have Bailey Ober, who we talked about earlier in the show, who is clearly a major league caliber starting pitcher, but is having to bide his time at AAA.
31 starts in his career, like a 3.82 ERA. Or something.
That's exactly his ERA. Okay. 147 strikeouts and 148 innings. I only can cite that because I've written it like 8 times in the last 2 weeks.
I mean, he's a legit. He's a guy who should be on a roster.
Yes. Pitching wise, they also have Randy Dobnak, who's trying to make his way back from back-to-back years missed with a finger problem.
Pretty good in spring training again, and in his first start here.
They have Trevor McGill, who was a big part of the Twins' bullpen last year and kind of got cut mid-spring training, a little bit surprisingly. They have a guy named Brent Hedrick, who's a lefty, who I think could be in that Cole Sands long relief role at some point to kind of break him in, get his feet wet. So, and they're hoping, in addition, that's a pretty stacked. I mean, they have 5 of the top 8 prospects on my preseason ranking. Now, a couple of them are hurt.
I think we had 7 of the top 11, something like that.
Right. Now, Brooks Lee's starting the year at AA, but if he performs well at AA, I would be shocked if he's not at AAA midseason. And
he was the Twins' top draft pick last year.
Yes, he's their best prospect, really. So, I mean, that's what, it's going to be fun to watch at AAA, but also it's meaningful to track the performance of these guys and where they're playing in the lineup defensively, because that's going to kind of hint at where the Twins view them as potentially being able to help them when they're called up. And I think you're going to see a lot of these guys. I mean, a lot of these names that we just mentioned at AAA are too good for AAA.
Right.
And are in the Twins' long-term plans with a lot of these guys, especially someone like Lewis if he comes back, Julian, all that. And so the question is, guys like Kirilloff, guys like Polanco, how long are they out? And then guys like Kepler, let's say, or some bullpen guys
Right.
who we might talk about Emilio Pagan next segment. Sorry in advance to everyone.
You ruined my tease.
Yeah, well. How long will the Twins stick with underperforming veterans when they do have some very intriguing prospects waiting in the wings in St. Paul?
Well, it's also, as we saw last year, it's helpful to have prospects at AA and AAA when the trade deadline approaches.
True.
Suddenly you've got all these guys, you're trying to figure out how are we fitting all these guys in exactly? Well, maybe you don't get to fit all these guys in. Maybe
they all end up in Cincinnati.
We just talked about maybe at the DH spot. We Buxton now playing center field, and we go out and we get a designated hitter, big bat or something for flipping a AA prospect or a AAA starter that we can't find room for in the rotation. We should also mention 3 of the Twins starting pitchers this year are free agents at the end of the year.
Right.
So we might be seeing some of those guys from the Saints in the 2024 rotation as well.
It's crazy for a AAA rotation to have Bailey Ober and Louis Varland.
Right.
I mean, those guys are both, I would argue, certainly Ober is clearly a mid-rotation caliber starter in the majors. I think Louis Varland, he's won back-to-back minor league pitcher of the year for the Twins, and he made, I think, 5 starts in September and was very solid for the Twins. Watching him, I mean, the majority of teams would have him certainly as their number 5 starter on opening day. So the fact that he's in a AAA rotation with Ober, and we haven't even mentioned someone like Jordan Balzovic, who's trying to come back from a bad year and a broken jaw suffered during spring training. So I don't know. I expect the Saints to be really good, but I don't really care about their record.
Right. No, I know. Right. Yeah. I'm more interested.
More importantly, I expect them to have guys at the ready to not only fill in for the Twins, which we saw is key, because last year they had to turn to some real scrubby, minor league veteran type of guys. They have legit prospects who can fill in the rotation, in the bullpen, in the lineup, and it's going to be an intriguing subplot to the season, assuming those guys play well at AAA and stay healthy. When and where are the Twins going to kind of open the door to them to join the mix here?
Yeah. When we get back,
I've ruined the surprise.
You ruined it.
Sorry.
The most asked question in the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line has to do with Emilio Pagan. Dun, dun, dun. We'll talk about that when we get back on Gleeman.
The Fan.
And welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek. We're going to talk about Emilio Pagan. I think we're going to see Emilio Pagan in this game, Aaron Gleeman, because the Twins have already jumped out to a 4-0 lead off of a 3-run bomb by Joey Gallo. Nice series there after not a great defensive series in the bottom of the first, but top of the second, we got a walk by Jose Miranda, a single by Nick Gordon, all versus Johnny Cueto, the right-handed pitcher, and then first pitch, 87 miles per hour, middle and maybe the outer half of the plate, and he just launched it.
Yeah,
So-
look very similar. We thought we were praising Joey Gallo quite a bit earlier. Wasn't enough. He now has home runs in three consecutive at-bats.
Right? Because he didn't get one more at-bat at the
And
end of
the
the
one
game.
was a double off the wall. He could very easily have 4 consecutive home runs.
He is on fire.
I mean, we
right
talked
now.
about this, but just the way the ball. I mean, these are line drives.
There was no question on that pitch.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
There was no question. There was no question in my mind before the pitch was actually hit where that one was going.
Yeah, Johnny Cueto, who was almost a Twin last year. Okay, so like you joked, but it's true. Emilio Pagan came in yesterday to not quite mop up. They were up 4 runs.
Yeah.
It was 7-3 at that point.
7-3, bottom of the ninth.
Right. And as soon as he came in, my Twitter mentions at Aaron Gleeman went berserk because I've written quite a bit about Pagan and tweeted quite a bit about Pagan. Although I would argue, some within Twins think I've been overly harsh towards Emilio Pagan. I would argue that all I'm doing is presenting facts and that he's created the harshness by pitching poorly last year. However, no one ever goes, boy, you've been too nice to Byron Buxton. Well, when he's playing well, I read he plays well.
Twins don't rag on you for that?
No, calm down about the praise about Carlos Correa here. But, I think we were both kind of on the same page that neither of us would have brought back Emilio Pagan. I feel
my
like
goodness. Yes.
Okay. I thought you were going to disagree. I was like, I don't even know you, man. But, obviously by sticking with him last year through what were extreme struggles, especially versus Cleveland in the middle of the season, the Twins were signaling that they believe he's a better pitcher. I mean, it would be hard to be a worse pitcher than he was in the middle of last season. But, my thing...
And he finished well in September.
Sure, in a lower leverage role. My argument against that line of thinking is, you're not the first team to think that about Emilio Pagan. When you look at him, he throws 96. He gets a lot of strikeouts. When he's rolling and he's going well, he does look like an elite reliever. But his mistakes...
And I would say if you just kind of judge him by the pitches he throws, he looks like 96-mile-per-hour fastball. And you take a look at what he is doing, you're like, that stuff feels like it would play. In the same way that Trevor McGill's does.
Sure. The problem with Pagan, and the Padres found this out down the stretch in 2021. The Twins found this out in the middle of last season. When he makes mistakes, he leaves them middle, and they get demolished, similar to what Cueto just did to Joey Gallo there. His mistakes are not just hit for singles and doubles. His mistakes, and they're seemingly about one per outing, and we saw most of them against Cleveland, he just puts the ball on the tee so often that it cancels out all the good work he's capable of doing. Now, with that said...
Well, and especially last year, what we saw was he also just had trouble with his control.
Right.
I mean, last year, I would say he actually took a step backwards from where he had been previously, because he was also just putting guys on base on top of giving up instead of a 1 or 2 run home run, it was a 2 or 3 run.
Now, I've been so critical of Pagan over the last year that another beat writer banned me from tweeting his name for the entire offseason. However, now that he's pitched, we can talk about him again. With all of that said, if you're going to bring him back for $3.5 million, which the Twins have done, again, I wouldn't have done that. But if you're going to do that, you need to find places to use him. Yeah. And he's not a long reliever. Now, he can go multiple innings, but, a 4-run lead in the 9th inning, while people may perceive that as a game still in doubt, if you're waiting for lower leverage or less in doubt spots than that, he's just not going to pitch very often. And I know people are going, oh, no, not that, anything but that. But, a 7-3 lead with 3 outs to get against a bad team, too, is something that a mediocre pitcher will convert, 95% of the time.
I mean, they don't pay him $3.5 million to be to be the 8th guy in the bullpen, to be the long reliever, right? Then we've got 3 guys at AAA and Cole Sands on top of that are all waiting to fill that role in the pool. Right. So he's going to be the 7th guy in the bullpen. And what we saw in the Royals series is he's the 7th guy in the bullpen. Right. Like, he came into the lowest leverage situation they had in that entire series.
Well, Moran was a little bit more. Moran turned Pagan's into a higher leverage by giving up a 2-run.
Oh, okay, all right.
But yeah, 6th or 7th, those two are sort of, I would say, interchangeable.
That's fair point, right? And I mean, he didn't look good in the WBC. He didn't look good in spring training. Right. He didn't look good at all last year. I didn't understand why they brought him back at $3.5 million. They kept telling. I didn't understand why they offered him arbitration. I really didn't understand them thinking that they could trade him.
Well, I mean, this is similar to what we talked about with Kepler a couple segments ago, but I was told flat out, similar to what I was told with Kepler, we can trade him.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, well, that's great. Why don't you?
Well, yeah, right. Yeah.
And they're like, well, we think we think he has more value.
Prove me wrong.
Right. All right.
Please.
But I mean, they said the same thing with Gio Urshela, and they ended up trading him. I mean, they generally have a knowledge of, can we make calls and move this guy for some marginal return? But it's funny to kind of say that and then say, but we're deciding not to do that, whether with Kepler or Pagan. And I'm like, well, that's great. You don't want to trade him for a marginal return. But if the alternative is keeping them on the team and letting the team suffer because of it, what have you really accomplished?
Can we not have another 7th guy out of the bullpen that we don't trust we barely trust with a 4-run lead in the bottom of the 9th?
If you're going to have a guy like Pagan as the 6th, 7th, 8th guy in the bullpen, and you're just going to hold him back for games that are kind of out of reach already. Like we said, there are fewer of those spots than you may think. If you're not counting a 4-run lead in the 9th inning as a low enough leverage spot that people feel safe using them. But beyond that, I would just rather have a young starter or former starter able to soak up multiple of those innings if you're going to hold them back for a mop-up or a long relief. If you're holding Pagan back for situations that barely matter and he's really only able to go 1 or maybe occasionally 2 innings, then that's the worst of both worlds. You're holding him back as almost like a specialist for spots that don't matter, in which case, is that really a good use of a roster spot?
I would suggest I'd rather have a 33-year-old left-handed Danny Colomb on the roster, and they traded him for cash consideration.
Right. I mean, right.
I don't get it.
Believe me, I agree.
I just don't get it.
I like that John's now attempting to overtake me on the Emilio Pagan anti-bandwagon.
Listen, I've been through the Ron Davis era. Right,
we've been through the Alex Colomé era.
I've been through the Ron Davis era. And the Ron Davis era lasted. It was one of those things where after a really, really terrible season, they brought him back the next year.
Right.
And you're just like, what are you doing?
Right.
And then the next year's bad. And it's one of those things where it feels like, and there's a lot of smart guys in the Twins organization. I know you guys understand the idea of sunk cost, right?
Right.
At some point, it feels like they keep playing the slot machine, and they're just like, I know it's going to hit. Eventually, it's going to hit.
And the thing that I start to question is, okay, what if you guys are all right about Emilio Pagan, and this season he ends up being a good, solid kind of seventh inning setup man? Okay. Is that the most precious commodity in the history of the world, that you've had to live through a horrible season and bring him back and all this stuff? Like,
the jackpot is not that good.
Right. The jackpot is not an MVP.
I'm not getting a hand pay on this.
Right. So, yeah, I don't get it. I do think, the idea that every time he pitches, people need to freak out is probably a little absurd at this point. But
I don't know. I think it might be justified, totally justified.
Look, if sometime this week he comes into a 2-run game in the 7th inning,
right?
Yes.
Right.
Freak out.
Right. Yeah.
But if it's a 4, 5, 6-run lead, 9th inning, these are the spots that you're going to have to use someone like him,
right?
Or you're just wasting the roster spot.
Listen, I had no problem with using Pagan where my question is why is he, you get that, right? Like, why is he even on the roster?
You are preaching to a choir that is singing along with you.
Here's where we're going to see him. We're going to see him versus Houston.
Yeah, to mop up.
Well, I don't know. I don't know, but there's just no way he doesn't do something terrible versus Houston. There's no chance.
Boy, you're gonna have some people in that clubhouse asking you about your statements about me. Should I ban you from talking about him?
Yeah, do that. Yeah, ban me from talking.
I don't think I can stop.
Those wanted posters in the press box aren't going anywhere.
See, Pagan's going to be stapling those to the.
Ban me from watching him while you're at it. Can you do that?
All right. Well, this is just getting mean now.
All right.
John, really, at the end of the show, John's just like, all right, I got thoughts. You guys are on my S list.
Like you said, after 3.5 hours of talking, I get a little punchy. All right. When we get back, let's talk a little bit more about the Marlins and what we can expect of them, and then wrap up the show. We'll do that when we get back. Welcome back to Gleeman and the Geek.
They said it couldn't be done, John.
Happy little music.
3.5 hours live on the radio.
I think that happy little music is about the Twins being up 4-0, but you think it's because we made it through
an entire show.
Through the rain. Play some Barry Manilow on the back end of this.
How does anybody do this 5 days a week, 12 months a year for 20 years?
You gotta really like to talk.
Yeah, and I thought I liked to talk.
You do like to talk.
Yeah, my girlfriend tells me that all the time. Man, you like to talk. John tells me that too.
And I'm amazed. And I'm not too surprised that your vocal cords are starting to give up.
Honestly, I can feel like my speech is affected. A man is not meant to talk for 3.5 hours. But we got a few minutes left, so we just wanted to a couple things. One, thank not only Dan Barrero, Chad Abbott, Justin Guard,
especially Brett Blakemore for holding our hand
for sure,
just
sitting through this
3.5 hours. Yeah, not right.
I told him,
pleasure as always. Don't worry.
I told him, feel free to take a nap, watch soccer, whatever you got, whatever you can do to pass the time.
I did. Common takes a working lunch. I did take a working dinner.
Okay.
While this was going on, yeah. I was locked in though.
He went to the Supermoon buffet across the street.
That's right, yeah.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for giving us a shot in the big chair. Hopefully we've not screwed it up so much that we will arrive home and get a text from Chad saying Wednesday has been canceled. So as of now, we will be back 3 to 6:30, filling in for Dan Barrero again Wednesday. we'll talk about the Miami series.
Yeah, we'll have 3 whole games to talk about because we got tonight's, tomorrow night's,
we
and
might also
Wednesday afternoon.
talk a little Wolves if they can bounce back, and who knows?
The Wolves play tomorrow night? Is Tuesday
I'm
night?
afraid to look. I watched last night. I'm a big Wolves fan, and it was just depressing, even by their standards. And also, if you've enjoyed these last 3.5 hours, first of all, God bless you. Thank you to my mom. That's really all I'm talking to. And you want more, first of all, tune in for Wednesday. We'll have more for you. But also, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Gleeman and the Geek podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts, on iHeart, on Spotify, on Apple, wherever.
What I like to say is, if you're one of those people who's like, thank God they're talking about baseball. I don't get enough baseball talk in my life. I really want more baseball talk in my life. Well, we tried to fix that about 11 years ago by starting a podcast where at least you can get a good hour and a half, 2 hours of deep dive, obsessive compulsive, crabby about Pagan talking for about an hour and a half about baseball every week. And then, if on top of that, even that doesn't do enough for you, we also have this Patreon where we do it another couple of times for another hour and a half, and those just cost you $1 a piece. So
yes, but let's get them started on the free show.
That's right.
Gleeman and the Geek is the name. I'm Gleeman. He's the Geek. Right. We've heard several billion times over the last decade, how can Gleeman not be the Geek? It's a fair point. It could be just the Geek and the Geek. It's not a great title for a show, so we've decided with Gleeman and the Geek. But we would love to have you tune in for that. And also, even if you don't want that, tune in Wednesday. I'm already looking forward to this. As much as I say this was, how do people do this? It kind of gets you addicted a little bit.
Well, especially because I'm looking forward to talking about the Twins in a couple days.
Yes, because we'll have seen Tyler Mahle, who's pitching as we speak.
Right.
We'll see Kenta Maeda's return from Tommy John surgery, and we'll have that afternoon, before we go on the air, Pablo Lopez's second start against his old teammates and Luis Ariz, which should provide plenty to talk about.
We'll also see have seen the Twins face a really good pitcher, Alcantara versus on Tuesday.
Cy Young winner.
Yeah, Cy Young winner. Nate rating. We'll also be able to talk about Luis Ariz, and his. I think he was hitting .529.
That's it.
He's
really dropped off
coming into this.
Since he left
coming
Minnesota.
into today's match. I miss Luis Ariz.
Yeah,
I do. I just miss him. The whole conversation about Max Kepler is that much more painful because we used to have Luis Ariz there.
Although,
and I'm just clear, I'm happy with the trade. I'm not disappointed in the trade. I really feel like Pablo Lopez has a chance not only to be, the best pitcher on the staff, but a chance to get into that ace level. Like, he seems to be kind of dancing around that level. We talked if you missed the first segment, 3 hours ago, where we talked about the new pitch that he is throwing to right-handed hitters on a regular basis and how much more effective that makes him. Go back and podcast it. Or
they also, by the way, got a pretty good prospect in Jose Salas, 19-year-old shortstop, along with Lopez in that trade.
Yeah, he's number 8 on Twins Daily's prospect.
This is one of those trades. They didn't trade Ariz thinking Ariz was going to turn into a 250 hitter all of a sudden. This is one of those trades that you hope goes pretty well for both parties.
Right.
I think that's likely, probably. I mean, Luis Ariz can hit, and if Pablo Lopez stays healthy, he's a very good pitcher. And if Salas turns into a switch hitting part of their infield 3 years from now, that I think can add value. But,
in some ways, this game also has another trade on. We get to see Mahle for the first time really pitching at what we think is 100%. We checked out his velocity readings. They looked like they were pretty good through the first inning.
I'm knocking on John's head, the wood.
That's right.
Right now. So thank you for listening. Thank you to Brett on the 1s and 2s. Thank you to Abbott and Barrero for being crazy enough to let us take the big chair. And we'll be back Wednesday.
Yep.
And check out Gleeman and the Geek in the meantime.
We'll talk to you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
It's up to